each of you, and who knows if others will pop in along the way. Maybe just real quick, we could do like a little 20-30 second intro. So my name's Anthony, and I have what has turned into a podcast called Artists Love Twin Peaks. I'm an 8th grade language arts English teacher in New Jersey, and I came to Twin Peaks in 2020, and I had a very fanatical period that is starting to calm down, but it's bubbling up like at any moment. So maybe some people could relate. Colin, can you just tell us a little bit?
Yeah, I'm Colin. I have the podcast Cream Corn the Universe, where what I do is that I talk to a different co-host each week about a particular character, where we'll go through whether it's the original series, the return, the books, or any other media that they would be in. And so that's what I do. I'm actually coming up on 50 episodes, so hard to believe that I could do it in like a year or so. But it's just something I really have fun doing and love catching up with people.
It's good to see you, man. Josh, we finally meet face to face. We've been chatting for
very nice to see your face.
Yeah.
It's always nice to actually see a face when you're just used to people on Twitter. So that's been very pleasant. So I'm a writer. I have written several books about TV shows and movies that I really love. One of them being Twin Peaks: The Return in particular. I call myself a new critic. I only write about art that moves me, that I transcend with, if you want to go that far with it. So I don't write negative criticism. I only write about things I'm super passionate about. And Twin Peaks just happens to be one of those things. So it's a real pleasure to be with you tonight.
Yeah, thanks, man. John Thorne, good to see you again.
Yeah, good seeing you. I'm John. I watched Twin Peaks on April 8th, 1990, and I've been thinking about it for a while. I've written a couple of things about it.
1990. So what year is this now? 2023.
33 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But what year is this question? I'm going to hold off on that for a minute. But
more than half my life has been thinking about Twin Peaks. Put it that way.
To me, it sounds like a life well spent. But because I know you enjoy the other parts of your life as well. So
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Josh, I wasn't planning on this, but you just said like you're only interested in art where you feel some sort of transcendence or something. Is that what you said? What do you mean about that?
So I use this term, proper art, in the Joycean sense. So in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Joyce lays out a really interesting aesthetic for art, where he puts it in two categories, of proper and improper. And improper art he calls either pornography or didactism. So it's either art that's intended to push you away with loathing from the object represented or pull you towards it to desire to possess it. But proper art, in his definition, is art that actually freezes you in time and space and helps you rise above yourself. You even lose concept of yourself, that's the transcendent element of it. So anyone who's done TM meditation or high level sports, anything like that, you've probably experienced moments of bliss where you lost time. What year is it? That concept that's very real to those who transcend. So I've actually experienced that in art several times. Growing up, I was a huge film fanatic, watched HBO movies all the time. And it was only until I got into college and actually learned that you could make a living writing about these things. And John knows this very well with his master's degree studies. I got real passionate about being able to write seriously about television, because where I grew up in the Midwest, TV was something you consumed and threw away. It was, commodity at best to port advertising into your brain. I didn't accept that. I actually found moral lessons in shows like Little House and Mr. Rogers and Star Trek. And as I grew older, I was able to wrestle with more complex and troublesome shows like Twin Peaks and actually find the light in those shows and write about it so that hopefully other people could also appreciate that.
That's cool. One thing you said when you talked about sort of rising above or sort of transcending, perhaps out of yourself or beyond yourself or above yourself.
Away from myself, out of myself, whatever.
Yeah, not 100% sure what the phrase was, but that's interesting because I don't know very much about it, but I've heard David Lynch talk quite a bit about like sort of like going in, and I've always associated it with like this downward movement whereas
downward, yeah.
it's kind of about this
TM,
like,
it's
upward movement, which
taught us downward. So
yeah,
like
I mean,
that.
I don't know if that matters at all. It's just kind of interesting to hear that. And
Yeah, for sure.
and I think I have another person who just showed up, but okay, I think his internet is in progress. So it looks like another guest will be here soon. Yeah, that's really neat. And hello, Joel. We'll give him some time. Does anybody else know anything about the concept of transcendence, whether it's in a TM sense or just like your own spin on it?
I get what Josh is saying about, something that captivates you so intensely that you kind of forget where you are and get, outside of your body. It doesn't happen a lot, but there are books and television shows and films that certainly, and even I've been to museums and sort of had that feeling just looking at, the right painting or the right piece of art. So that I find that fascinating, and it's really, I think great art really soothes us and it can rescue us as well when we are perhaps at low points in our lives.
I saw 3 nodding heads at the word rescue, and that's interesting. Does anybody care to say more on that?
I'm not sure. This might come off more as shower thoughts, and apologies in advance. But I feel like art should be able to like challenge you. It should be able to be like something that like you would be a different person had you not come across it otherwise. And I think there's something very important that if you just kind of look at the stuff that you're just kind of like, I guess, comfortable with or you already have, then there's like a certain level of complacency. But if you find something new, then it just sorry, I'm trying to think the best way to describe it, because I know that sometimes different art can kind of give different responses, but I just think it's important to always kind of try to pursue something that would evoke certain responses and to, yeah, sorry, I probably should have thought about it before I said more, but well, I just hope that, if everyone knows what I'm talking about, I hope that it's able to come across.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what you're saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I agree with what you said right off the start, is that a lot of times you are a different person after you've encountered certain art. You find out more about yourself, and that's a great value. And certainly, as I've written about Lynch and Twin Peaks, I think that's a great example of art that really asks you to think about yourself, or perhaps it doesn't ask you overtly, but it just implicitly asks you to kind of learn more about yourself as you're processing it, or at least that's the outcome. But that's part of why I think it has the appeal it has, the lasting appeal it has, why it's still 33 years after that pilot aired. And I know it's only 6 years after the return, but still people are talking about that. They're not talking about the other shows that were on television at that time, because it didn't impact them the same way.
Yeah, well said. It's also a communal language, right? So nobody can talk politics anymore, obviously. Like, that's not a place where we can come and exchange ideas and walk away more than we went into that conversation with. But with art,
except for Josh and Anthony, but that's rare,
That's fair.
Once in a while,
I try not to talk politics anymore. But if you talk about art, you can talk about politics in a way that is abstracted, and you're not as personalized in that. So like, your opinion on what happens to Cooper and my opinion on what happens to Cooper may be totally different, and that's awesome. It's great. We allow that diversity and we encourage it. So when we come together and connect over that, we can bring those shared transcendent experiences together, and now we've got some commonality that goes beyond where we were born, where we grew up, and what we believe, right?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, especially when it comes to work like David Lynch's or Twin Peaks specifically, which, if someone was to say there's only one finite interpretation, they would be looked at like they had 4 heads. So that just by its very nature lends itself to exchange, I think. And is Joel here?
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I was late.
Hey.
Had a little trouble getting in, but here I am.
Great to see you, man.
You too.
Hey.
All right, buddy.
Good.
Cool. And are you able to see the four, or hear at least the four of us?
Yeah, I'm doing just the audio because I've still got the slow laptop, which is going to be fixed soon. But like I said to Anthony, not soon enough for this conversation, unfortunately.
That's okay.
So-
That's perfect, because this whole chat is a little bit in honor of you, because there have been conversations that you and I have had that I just found so light at times, and then also very deep at times, but fun all the way through, that I thought it would be cool to do it in a group. So I mean, really, you are the genesis of this. And
Well, I'm glad we could kick that off, kick off a new tradition.
yeah, and Joel, we actually all introduced ourselves in like 15 seconds or less, which is rather impossible, but could you try?
Sure. I'm Joel Bocko for Twin Peaks, I guess, work. I'm probably best known for Journey Through Twin Peaks, which is a video series on the film. And I try to cover or on the film and the series. And I try to cover the series in a lot of different ways. Look at the characters, look at the episodes, look at various aspects of it in all different mediums, and other film and TV as well.
Cool. And I'm going to do something I wasn't really planning on, but I hope this works out. Can you guys see my screen at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so this was not exactly planned, but this is from my classroom, and I teach 8th grade language arts. And one of the books we read is The Pearl by John Steinbeck. And there was something that John just said before in response to basically the flow of conversation. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. So in the first chapter, I would say even like the first 2 or 3 pages, my students and I pulled out of that book, which is a really short novella, it's like 91 pages. We pulled out all these ideas that might be explored in the course of the text. And they're all really dropped in there, like either overtly or subtly in the first couple pages. And I thought that was really cool, because this is a book that we're still reading, like, 60, 70 years later. And one of the things down here is just like, why do we still read things? Why do we still care so long after the first publication? And so what I'm curious, what you guys think is, if we were to generate like a new list of ideas or concepts that you think are at play, or maybe being like dramatized or brought to life or explored in some way, what are some items that you all think might be on the list for, we could say Twin Peaks at large, or we could limit it to The Return, and they would probably be different than most of these, but does that make sense at all?
It makes sense. I think there'd be a lot. I was reading that list. There's
Yeah.
so many overlap. I mean,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
have told me the list, then I would have believed you. Like, oh yeah, yeah. So,
Really? Anything in particular?
well, I mean, I don't see the list now, but I mean, it said
Yeah,
light,
that's good.
dark, chaos, light, dark, good, evil, rage, order, chaos, culture, community. You know, a lot of those. Race is an interesting thing, because that's one thing Twin Peaks tends not to address, and I've thought a lot about that. It tends to avoid that, almost overtly avoid it. But anyway, but a lot of the other things are desire, the natural world, human nature. There you go. That's it.
I think technology's missing from this. I mean, obviously the Pearl was written at a different time, and technology meant a different thing. Steinbeck was concerned about his typewriter. That was his technology. That was it. But for us, and in particular Twin Peaks: The Return, technology is a core theme that's explored.
I guess also, if we're going with some that's not on the list before going to what is on the list, the one that I think of is sickness, if that can be qualified, because I think of how even the earliest days of Lynch with motion pictures, I think of 6 men getting sick, and how much that permeates. I would say The Return for the Twin Peaks part, where it's like, you have Ashley Judd's husband, you have the girl who just emerges from the car after Bobby sees her outside the Double R diner. And there's like a lot of small parts that just kind of pops up, and there's maybe it's all scattershot, maybe it's unified, but sickness is something that I've come across and thought about in the realm of The Return quite a bit.
That's a great point. It hasn't been explored a lot. That's a really good, a good topic.
I think for me, what interests me making a list like this would be specifically focusing on the return and things that are in the return that aren't in Twin Peaks, which I think some of the answers so far have kind of touched on already, because I do think some of the things that the return deals with, I mean, even sickness, I don't really think of I can't think of sickness being that present in Twin Peaks, the original. And I think for me, one of the big differences between the original series and the return is the concept of the passage of time and aging, because the original Twin Peaks is kind of timeless in a way, and it's a bit of the 50s, a bit of, it's very archetypal, and it takes place in such a compressed timeline where you have about 30 days in this town. And even when you get the film, you're going like a week before. Whereas the return, it also takes place over a couple weeks, but there's so much built into it of the time in between the two series that we didn't see. Like, we feel like strangers sometimes to these characters who we were so familiar with 25 years ago. The stuff from the original series now being viewed through sort of a telescope of history. And that's really interesting to me. I think that's one of the most significant developments of the return, where it brings something new to the table.
So if Joel were a student in my class at this point, I would say, what would be the one word or phrase that could nail down what you just said, Joel?
Phrase, I think I could do, because I could say passage of time. If I was just a word, this doesn't capture all of it, because it isn't just about the individual lives, but aging, certainly. And I think that ties into the idea of sickness, because a lot of the we do see the sick child, so it's not just purely older people, but there is a sense of frailty to the return that is different from what we see in Twin Peaks.
All of those work really well, and for 8th graders, and even I would say for high school students, I can't believe I'm actually using my teaching materials right now, but it's hard for people to kind of come up with a theme statement, or to identify a theme that's not their first thought. So to sort of revise our way into something stronger. But we try to put these into nouns or abstract nouns, or maybe noun phrases, and then use that as the start of a sentence. So I would say Joel, or really anybody, and we're not going to play this game for long, but is there any word, perhaps the passage of time, or something else that one of you were thinking, where you sense some sort of theme from the text, where your sentence would start with that word and then end with a period? Is anything jumping to mind, even a weak version?
If the one that I'm thinking of is actually the very first one, is family, and this is going through the lens of the return, because when I think of the Dougie Jones arc in particular, where I know that that's one that's not it's not a fan favorite depending on who you ask, but the thing that got me through it was that every time I watched the way that Dougie would interact with Janie E or Sonny Jim, I would think about that scene in mid-season 2 when he says his tape to Diane that he hopes it's not too late to start a family. So I think of how after being in the Black Lodge, or the Red Room, if you prefer, for 25 plus years, he gets to not only experience that, but he also gets to better their lives and the people around them. And I think of how pivotal it is at the end of part 16, where it's he makes that decision that he's going to go back to Twin Peaks, and subsequently what we see in part 17 and 18. But the fact that he does leave it behind, it's if he's doing the right thing in the moment, if the tulpa that he gives to them that we see in part 18, if that's a well-worthy replacement. So when I think of the character of Cooper in the return, the family dynamic is something that comes up quite a bit for me.
So if you had to narrow that down to one sentence, and the sentence started with the word family, what does Twin Peaks have to say or offer, in your opinion?
I would say
you gotta start with the word family. That's the rule.
Okay. Family is something that Cooper, it's something that he wants, but also he's not sure if he wants his loyalties tied to with his family, or with his I guess what he thinks are his obligations to everything involving the Red Room and Laura Palmer.
And then for your second draft, You would not be allowed to mention any character directly, so you'd have to sort of abstract it a little bit. So on the concept of family, Twin Peaks offers to us that family, blah blah blah.
I would say that in
You're
that
back in
case,
school.
yeah, in the case of family, then it's the choice of if you settle down for a more traditional life to help the people around you, or you try to go for the obligations that you have or you feel that you have that are that lie beyond it.
Appreciate that. At the risk of getting too personal, is there anybody here who had who made family decisions or who had a family sort of crossroad where you could perhaps move your life this way or that way, and you were able to either stumble into a decision or consciously make one? And if so, how did that work out? That's too personal. Does that make sense?
In relation to like art or Twin Peaks or
No,
just in general?
just personally.
I'm sure there is, but it would take me some time to think about it.
That's a deep one, man.
Yeah, because Cooper seems at a crossroads, potentially, and I know a lot of people have interpreted it that way. Potentially, that he has, you know, maybe the family route or some other route, and I think especially in The Return, he seems to be at maybe perhaps a handful of crossroads. But I'm going to pause just for a second.
I'm sure you'll steer us there. Fine.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Alison, how are you?
Hi. Sorry for coming in late. I'm still in the grind.
You seem to be at a restaurant of some sort.
I am. I can't escape the double R. I just can't escape.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good. This background is from one of my friend Diana, who I was in Twin Peaks with last week, gave me this video, and it's like one of those videos where it just plays jazz in the background for 5 or 6 hours, and there's rain coming down in the window, and so in the winter I just keep it on all the time.
So cool.
I noticed it right away. I was like, oh, it's from that video, that double
Right.
R video.
Yeah,
It's 10 hours.
If you look at my school email account, that video has played for about like 4,000 hours.
Yeah, right. Yes, it makes it all very cozy. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for inviting me to join.
Yeah, what a pleasure to see you, and welcome to this in-depth conversation on Mulholland Drive. So you got here just.
Ooh, excellent. And so I just, I am still doing a few worky kind of things, but I'm here, so I may get distracted a little bit, but I'm here.
Oh, good. Yeah, and if you want to pop in or out or mute on and off. But,
okay.
Could you just everybody somehow manage to introduce themselves in like 15 to 20 seconds or so?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'm Alison Ivy, and I'm talking to you from Marina del Rey, California, where it's very pretty outside today. I work for a company that makes movie trailers, and it's a very successful company, but it's been pounded quite hard by the strikes going on. So it's been a little bit of a challenging time in that way. Fortunately we got some good work in this week, but it's tough industry wide for sure. I'm the CFO, so I handle the money. So I've had the really difficult work the last month or so, but I think it'll be fine. And I work from home, which is the double R. And I'm wearing my absolutely magnificent t-shirt I got at the event last week, which was it was so great. I will forever be grateful that I got to be there in person and experience that. So everyone was there in spirit for sure.
Awesome. Well,
yeah.
Coming. And some people have some cool t-shirts on tonight. That's
right. Yeah. It's a good t-shirt collection club.
Yeah. So what you missed so far is me trying to make some decisions as far as how to navigate the discussion, and I'll make some slip ups and some good choices along the way, and we'll hopefully just enjoy it. And the first thing I'm going to do is pull 2 random questions that I did pull randomly ahead of time. And basically, if anybody sees anything that you want to talk about, just like jump right in, either one. And just I'm going to read it because it's probably, this might be like podcasted. So the first one is, has the giant received promotions over the past 25 years, or is the fireman a separate being? And then I think in part 4, Mike or Gerard says to so-called Dougie, he says, you were tricked. And I'm just wondering by whom and like how exactly was he tricked? And are these answers obvious or maybe not so much? So we'll try this out. And if anybody wants to jump in, by all means, go for it.
Outside of the text, the giant has received a promotion. That doesn't necessarily help you. You're going to hate my answers. Gerard, the Mike Gerard question could be the remnant of 2 different creative personalities at odds with what the story was supposed to do. There, how's that? Not what you wanted to hear.
Well, what I want to hear is myself talking as little as possible, ideally. So, but also like if anybody wants to just be like, I'll just pass, like get to a better question, I'll just say that, or just
They're all good questions.
I think that the fireman is the evolution of the giant, and the way that the tree thing is the evolution of the arm, even though it appears to be moving backwards in time in that case.
How so?
I think that he is the same being, but amplified, let's say. And I'll kind of straddle the in-world and the out-world in that I would say I think particularly Lynch has new ideas about characters that he treats. I don't think he's super concerned with, retconning, so to speak. I just think if he has a new idea about the character, he adds it in and you're left to make sense of it and reconcile it with what you knew before.
I think in the case of the giant / fireman, I think for me, I think it's probably worth addressing that when we refer to the giant, this is more so when Cooper sees in the original series. So it's really just on him referring to the giant, and then the fireman is more of like the larger aspect of who he is. And I know that time is very relative when you get to like the Black Lodge or the White Lodge. But when I think of part 8 and like the fireman's role in it, I think of like how with part 8, how that just permeates all of Twin Peaks at large for me. So I think that when we see him in the original series, it's just a small part of a larger picture, and it still is like that for the return. But I think that for me at least, there's a broader context of what his role is, how he can talk to Cooper, how he can kind of, I guess, go between both the Black Lodge and the White Lodge. And as for the second question, I think if it's referring to the someone manufactured you line, I actually think that for me, it's Mr. C who created them. But the thing that's peculiar to me is that Cooper, Mr. C gets out of the Black Lodge in early 1989, but we don't get anything about Dougie Jones till 1997. So the question I have in my head is, why was there that 8-year time frame? Was it just like a laundry list of stuff that Mr. C had to do? And if not, like, why was it so hard to create the tulpa to begin with? And that's, again, the topic of tulpas, I guess, in the real world, if you will, on that matter.
And Anthony, when you use the word promotion, do you mean literally like a job promotion? From being the giant to a fireman?
I think that's probably what I had in mind. What I was telling everybody else earlier is, like, my plan for tonight is to kind of bounce back between 2 types of questions. And one of them are like the questions almost everybody asks when they first see the show, like the classic questions that many of which are still not answered. And then the other questions are like random things I was thinking driving to work while listening. And so that was one of them, the promotion thing. I don't know where that came from exactly, but I think I kind of meant literally. So like that would imply he's part of at least some sort of organization to some extent. Or
well, he's got, he's definitely got management responsibilities, I think in the environment that he's in. I mean, it's always been mysterious to me about the bank of whatever those units are, those machines, but there are a lot of them. It sort of reminded me of those scenes in movies back in the day of the secretaries sitting in rows and rows of, filing and typing and, kind of a thing. So there's definitely a managerial aspect to it. And I think, he has a lot of responsibility in whatever it is he's trying to achieve. That's how it felt to me.
I love those things. I imagine, I know they're not meant to be like a bunch of Jeffreys, but they seem like they could each house something like powerful. When Mr. C's captured in the cage under the watchful eye of Briggs, you have like floating Briggs' head, and then like all of those machines are like called upon. They're called into action at that moment to maybe redirect him from presumably the Palmer house to the sheriff's station. And I don't have really any other thoughts about that, but it seems like all of that energy is like needed or at least called upon to make that transition. Does anybody have any like interpretation or thoughts?
I do think I think he went from counselor to fireman. So what does a fireman do? Put out fires. That's a critical role. Like if you don't have the fireman, it's going to burn down. So it speaks to the escalation of intensity of what is at stake between Twin Peaks, where it's essentially an investigation into a girl who's already dead. We solved the murder. How do you get tension after you solve the murder of this girl? And the truth is that he goes mad. So the man goes mad, and I'm going to combine the answer to the last question along with this one. If I had to put it into a sentence, I would say that for me, well, speaking only for me, the key theme of Twin Peaks, the redemption of faith in the person who has gone through the worst kind of trauma, witnessing the worst kind of trauma, the kind of trauma that you can't explain rationally. You can't explain why a father would rape and murder his daughter. You just cannot do that logically. And it wrecked every bit of faith that Cooper had in all the institutions of justice and mercy and goodness in the world. And I believe that is what we are working through in The Return and The Fireman. I actually have a whole section in my book where I lay this out, that he could be essentially the shepherd of his frontal cortex. The frontal cortex in a human being is responsible for the CEO function. Like we put everything together. It's where we associate memories with love, and we make decisions that are based on higher self instead of just what the body needs, which I would say is properly associated with the amygdala, the fear center, which of course Black Lodge is a great moniker for that. So for me, The Fireman absolutely got promoted, and that reading of it is purely psychological. It's purely contained within the mind of Cooper. That's just how it's settled for me, and it sits right for me. I don't expect anyone else to agree that that's what's happening, but for me, that's where it's at.
I've got a question for you, Josh. So with that reading of Twin Peaks, do you feel that that's taking place on a subconscious level for Cooper? Because it's a fascinating idea. I'm struck by the way in which season 2, he seems to brush over in many ways that aspect of it. In fact, he's the one who says, I think, to Truman, any easier to believe a father would do that to the daughter, rape and murder his own daughter. But he says it almost in a way of like, so let's instead focus on the supernatural or whatever. And then he has that weird exchange with Sarah and all that. Like, so is your reading sort of that in the lodge, it bubbles up somehow, maybe with that confrontation of Leland or something? Like, I'd just be really interested to hear more about that, because I think I've struggled in some ways with how much The Return is sort of Cooper's journey, and how does it tie into his failures or misunderstandings in the original series. So I guess expand on that if you will.
Great question, and I will be interested to hear all of your opinions on this. But at the heart of Twin Peaks is an irrevocable trauma. It's a terrible thing. It's hard to even convey. Imagine if that was your pitch for somebody to watch the show. No one in their right mind would watch the show if that was your pitch of what happens in Twin Peaks. But the truth is that stuff happens every day. And imagine these police officers and detectives that actually go into these situations and have to wrestle with that just morally and spiritually inside yourself. It would wreck me. I don't think I would be able to do that work. And so just looking at it that deeply, I do think it's easy to brush it off like he does in season 2. It's very logical, right? We've got to move on to the next thing, but he doesn't move on. He obsesses and ruminates over it, and it does bubble up in dreams, of course, which is that's where those things that we sweep under the rug tend to come back and bite us in our dreams. And I think, you know, that's a lot of what's going on, not just subconscious, but it's also conscious. It's affecting his memories.
Do you think that happens, I guess, in season 3 as almost sort of a reaction to the repression in season 2? Or do you think there's stuff in mid and late season 2 where he's, and of course, just to be clear, I think we're all on the same page. We're sort of, I don't want to say imposing, but like retroactively sort of digging this out of the season, which was written by people who were not pursuing that theme. But, you know, do you see stuff there that has that potential for that reading, that, or do you feel like it's more of a pushed away and then comes rushing back in like the season 2 finale and season 3?
I'll answer for myself, and I want to hear everyone else's. So I couldn't care less what the creators thought or what the writers wrote or what any of that stuff. I want to look at a piece of art and have my own interpretation from it. So I'll say that out front. Like I'm not interested in what Mark Frost or David Lynch intended and what they put out. I am interested in how I perceived it. So yes, I do believe that from season 2 to season 3, there was a huge failure. And John, you wrote that great essay years ago on Firewalk with Me and the reading of that first 25 minutes or whatever it was. And that dramatically changed how I perceived the finale of season 2 and Firewalk with Me in particular. I mean, I view Firewalk with Me as a sequel, not a prequel to Twin Peaks. I believe that what we see in Firewalk with Me is a man caught in a chair, and he's going over his case files and he's making suppositions and he's trying to answer this riddle of how this terrible thing could have happened. And he gets lost in that dream. And at that point in time, he's completely corrupted from his soul and he's in danger of losing everything that he was. And that to me is the story that plays out in Twin Peaks: The Return.
I'm popping in for 3 seconds just to say thank you. Thank you, Joel, for asking questions. And I love that. Just any thoughts you have at all, everybody just like freeform it. And I'm brewing a cup of coffee, so I'm going to mute myself. But please, Colin, continue.
But no, first I would say, actually, Josh, that's a really great observation. Also, Joel, I just want to also say great question as well. Because if I had to pick the one scene that when Joel's mentioning, is that it is after Leland dies and they're all just reeling from what happened. And of course, Truman, he's trying to figure out like how this could happen. And so, yeah, Cooper says that it's like, oh, would it offer more comfort to say that a father could rape and kill his daughter? And Truman, of course, is defeated, saying like, no. And I forget how Major Briggs phrases what he says to Cooper. But what I think says a lot about Cooper from what we see in The Return is that he says that it's important to get to the bottom of it as someone of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that the outlook that Major Briggs has, where he's in the White Lodge, like explicitly all the scenes are in like the White Lodge. And then for Cooper, he's in the Black Lodge. Like even when we get to part 18, where it's like it comes back to Laura and Cooper when she's whispering in his ear. So I think that there's something about whether it's Cooper's outlook in general or his like allegiance to like a set organization. I think there's just something where it's like he wants to do the right thing, but he's missing a larger part of the picture. So that's my big outlook for The Return. That's why I brought up the family part earlier, is that, you know, he has this he has this family that he could very easily do better for their lives and better them and better himself. But then he chooses to go back to this case where it's like he has to do it. Like it has to be like, I don't want to say like I know the white knight syndrome comes up a lot, but I think it's just like, for me, I look at it as that he's like looking at a small part of a larger picture, and it's to his detriment.
No, I have a very small piece of like really silly trivia, not trivia, but like it was something that I looked up, and Josh, it reminded me when you were talking about the amygdala, was that I don't remember why I decided to look it up, but for me, I'm a a huge fan of The Secret History of Twin Peaks. It's a book that really is with me all the time, and I think about it a lot. And so one day I just looked up Cyril Pons. I don't even remember why, but Cyril is a word for master, and Pons is the frontal, some part of the right. And so I thought, wow, I mean, it just, for me, I think Mark Frost weaves through it in a way that that is so present for me all the time. Like, I think about that scene in the White Lodge with all of that imagery and the mechanics and all of those things, and I feel like that's so much, the visual is so much David Lynch, but that there's such a deeper meaning to it, and how Mark Frost is so alive in all of that. I don't know. It just reminded me when you mentioned that part of the brain, Josh, and I was like, oh yeah, there was something in there. I mean, I don't know if he would ever say that that's what he was going for, but both parts of the name have actual meaning. Master of the, of the mind. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of those silly things that, you just trying to find meaning in different parts of it. But I recently, Josh, had gone back to listen to some of the episodes of the Twin Peaks Unwrapped podcast, and I just was doing a random search for it, because there's so many episodes in their portfolio, in all of the years that they had been doing the show, and all those episodes that I have not listened to all of them. And the episode that I picked was the one that they did with you. And I don't know, were you on their show more than once?
Yeah, a few times, luckily. Yeah,
yeah. So I guess it was, the conversation was about what you're talking about Cooper's plight throughout Twin Peaks, and how it related to meditation. And I don't know, I just wanted to say, since we're here, how great it was a really, it was a great episode, but how deep, and it made me think about it in ways that I hadn't really thought about it before. And that one about, Cooper as the central character feels very clear to me, even though I think a lot of people want to, I don't know. I think people make the story about Laura, I think, as wanting to point to a central character, but I appreciate the perspective of Cooper's, that it's Cooper's journey.
The word association that I always have with amygdala is hijack, because there's something called a amygdala hijack, where it's almost like your brain is temporarily getting taken over internally, or maybe even externally. So mastering control of one's mind is sort of like a bit of an antidote to that hijacking. Mm-hmm. And that's something that happens when I think when you get a shot of cortisol shooting through your body, and it leads to all sorts of irrational behaviors, or people ruining their lives in a 5-second bad moment,
and it happens during dreams a lot. Cortisol, when you have cortisol shoot through your body, it can happen very dramatically during dreams.
Yeah. So
what's the relation between cortisol and cortisone, the drug? Is there any?
I don't think so. I think those are separate things.
Totally separate things.
Cortisone is a steroid, and cortisol is a hormone, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But cortisol is it's so interesting to think about these things in relationship to this, because cortisol is associated with behavior, and in your dreams, if you get a rush of cortisol, it's because you can be having a dream where you're in danger. That's interesting to think about.
One could argue that Dougie Jones has no cortisol. He doesn't react to danger.
Right. That's so true.
Well, he does. He kind of reacts physically, because he does when he grabs the gun from the guy when he's coming in and all that. But he doesn't seem to have any super strong emotional reaction, I guess. He does. he has pleasure. He experiences pleasure for sure.
Yes.
I guess I was thinking of the coffee, but actually, I guess that could be Janie as well. It's
Sure.
the scene with her. He's definitely having a good time. But yeah, he seems like he can feel a sort of like muted joy, but yeah, you're right. Like there is no real. He's kind of fearless in a way that even Cooper, maybe especially Cooper, is not. When you think about well, I don't know. I guess that's debatable. Like, is fear his flaw in the season 2 finale? Like, is that what takes him down? I have a lot of thoughts. I'd like to hear some. I don't know. What do people think? Let's have, okay, if I can do Anthony, because he said, ask questions. Well, I want to hear like roundtable. What's everybody's thoughts? I know John's written a whole essay about it, but like, what are people's thoughts on what kind of quote unquote brings Cooper down or traps him in the lodge in the season 2 finale? Because it does feel kind of ambiguous, and you can almost kind of read into it what you want.
I guess if I can start, I think of when Major Briggs, when he comes back out and he comes to the sheriff's station and he's not quite himself. He says fear and love open the doors. And I think of like how central that is to, I guess, Annie in the season 2 finale. Not so much for her, but more of what Cooper's going through, because obviously Cooper, he has like a dime a dozen love interests, but in this case, in this exact moment, that is the first thing that he goes in for the Black Lodge, is that, he has this love for Annie. And I think there's like, I guess, like fear and love opens the doors. Maybe that's the inherent flaw in his case, is that he's going in to rescue Annie, and then he has like everything that goes on in season 2, the finale. And so I think that there might be just like almost an inherent flaw right from the start of like once you enter the Black Lodge, and the fact that he does have that imperfect courage for once he does get in there.
What does that mean, imperfect courage?
Well, it's sort of like in the middle part of season 2 when Hawk says that if you face this with imperfect courage, it will annihilate your soul. And I think that when he goes into the lodge, that yes, he actually, I will say, is that one thing that he does do is that he sorry, let me try to phrase this properly, but when Wyndham Earl says he can trade his soul to save Annie, he does say yes, but I think there's just something about confronting his actual doppelganger, where there's it's like in the case of Mr. C, is that there's these dark, repressed aspects of Cooper. Because when we see him in the original series, he's very upbeat, he's very chipper. There's little moments of vulnerability that can chip away, but there's not like this dark, like the most dark, suppressed aspects that are coming out in any way. So the fact that he has to confront it is something that he just can't really quite grasp. I would say if we had to compare, it's sort of like with Laura in Fire Walking, because for me, I look at that movie as like she's confronting the worst of her fears in terms of like who is her abuser and how she's going to actively pursue finding out who it is against all odds, and of course taking the ring as well. So I think that Cooper, in a very small trial, he found a way that he ended up faltering in that regard. Sorry, I don't know if that's quite answering the question properly, but was there anything I should build off of or anything I should follow up on?
Yeah, I'll go next. I think that really made a lot of sense. It just reminded me of like trying to walk a high wire. Like you better not screw up if you're going to go on this wire. Is that sort of the idea of going into the lodge or through the curtains? Like you best not screw up, because the imperfect courage concept is always a little bit fuzzy for me. But for the first time, like just now, and you talking sort of maybe solidified it a little more or reinforced it. I was just thinking maybe he gets stuck there because that's a place where you see all the things that are happening inside you potentially, and which one or two or zero of the six of us have looked that deeply and that nakedly within to see like all the stuff that's in there. And it's possible that he just couldn't. I don't necessarily think this is the case, but that's where you see what's inside. And a lot of people can't handle that. Who here could handle that? I mean, perhaps I think I was expecting Josh to raise his hand, because I know he spent a lot of time in stillness. but who knows to what extent that's cover. I don't know if you're covering something, but that's hard to handle, I would think. What do you think?
Oh, it's ugly inside. It's ugly inside, buddy. Yeah, it's ugly.
I guess sort of on that note, this actually comes back to Laura, how she confronts her adversity. I even thought this before I saw Fire Walk with Me and read The Secret Diary, but both of them actually reaffirmed this for me. I think of her doppelganger in season 2, where it says, she says, meanwhile, and she's just screaming, and she just, the way Cheryl Lee is moving her body, just like behind the chair and running up. I always view that as, there's just like, it's just like what was in Laura this whole time, just in terms of like the trauma and all the conflict that she was dealing with. And I think of how in Fire Walk with Me, when she gets her angel, where she ascends, but then all this, all the terrible, I guess if you had instilled all the trauma and everything bad that she was dealing with, it was like, certainly from 12 onward, that's all instilled and just stays in the Black Lodge. So I think that's, it's like Cooper, not only is he seen his true self when he sees his doppelganger, but he's also in a lot of ways seen like what Laura had to deal with, and just like how much it just was just crushing for her. Again, like I said, if there's anything anyone wants to build off of or challenge or anything like that, please feel free.
I'd like to chime in a little bit on the imperfect courage thing. It's interesting you brought it up, because I've never really thought about it too. I've never given it, I guess, a lot of direct thought, but it's always troubled me a little now that you brought it up, the idea of imperfect courage. I think it actually can tie into season 3 a little bit, but who has perfect, who has perfect courage? I'm not sure it's what Cooper's being tasked to do at the end of season 2 is to be inhuman, to go into this place and respond in an impossible way, because I don't think you can have perfect courage. I don't think any human being can have that. If you're a human being, you will be afraid. And so that's an interesting thing that happens there. And does he pay a price for being a human being? I think probably he does. And that's just, he's being manipulated by the writers there and not by necessarily a well thought out scenario of, a world building. But it strikes me too that we see a Cooper at the end of The Return who is trying to project the idea of perfect courage as if he is a super being. I've written about this and I won't belabor it, but getting back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, one of the things I think that's striking is the way Cooper dismisses Mr. C. He turns his back on this part of himself that has wreaked havoc in the world and has committed these tremendously awful and heinous crimes. That was Cooper. That was a part of Cooper. And Cooper in part 17 ignores it. And in fact, he will not address it. He will not accept it being part of himself. And I think this speaks to some of the flaw of Cooper, at least as he's portrayed in season 3, is that he sees himself as something impossible. And you can't be that. And I haven't really thought about tying it in to what happened at the end of season 2. So now I'm just thinking out loud, and all of this is sort of stream of consciousness, but the elements are there. As in some ways, Cooper behaves in part 17 of The Return as if he should have behaved in the last episode of season 2. And I still think that's the wrong choice. He was trapped by plot in the end of season 2. But he wasn't necessarily behaving in a way that anybody, that all of us would behave that way. It's just, again, I'm thinking out loud. But what we see in Cooper at the end of The Return is a Cooper who's trying to be perfect, and that doesn't work either.
Actually,
yeah.
Oh no, sorry, Joel, you go on.
I was just going to say that's really interesting, because when you started talking, before you even got to the point where you said that, Cooper is trapped by the plot, I was thinking, I don't remember what it was that someone said, maybe something Anthony said that triggered this, but I was thinking, Cooper's kind of being punished for the sins of the narrative in a way. The character is being made to bear this burden at the end of season 2 for things that not so much he as a character did, but that the writers did in brushing past the murder mystery, or the trauma that spurred the murder mystery, and trying to come up with this other narrative. And then now almost, Cooper bears that burden. And I think of that specifically in the context of Martha Nachemson's book, which to me, I think that more than anything has influenced my reading of The Black Lodge. Certainly John's essay as well. I think it's Half the Man He Used to Be, about Cooper being split, but specifically the way that like Martha Nachemson writes about the 2 scenes of Cooper in the Red Room in all of the original Twin Peaks. There's only 2. There's his dream, and then there's his entry in the finale. And they're very different. In the dream, he's very receptive. She codes it in a very, very sort of gendered way where it's almost more feminine in a way. He is like on Laura's wavelength. He's listening, he's watching, he's going with the flow, he's smiling. And in the finale, it's this effort of like willpower to save someone. Like it's a sort of a contrived, very kind of Frostian venture. I was going to say another thing is I think Mark Frost is the one who came up with the idea of the perfect courage, imperfect courage, but it's interesting that it rhymes so well with some recurring Lynch themes. I mean, fear is the mind. I mean, I guess that's from Frank Herbert and Dune, but Lynch did the film of it. Fear is the mind killer, and ideas that are present in maybe Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive of people unable to confront things in themselves. Certainly John's written about that a lot. So it's interesting to me the way that this kind of almost like mechanistic sort of Frost way of looking at confronting the shadow synthesizes in some way with Lynch's kind of version of that. But yeah, also just the idea that Cooper kind of he becomes this like, he's kind of, I guess, because he's Twin Peaks at its best in some ways, he is also forced to bear the burden of Twin Peaks at its worst maybe as well.
So just quick follow up, and then I'll stop. So some of the things you said, Joel, are really interesting about plot and about character, about Lynch and about Frost, and about the 2 Red Room scenes. So you have the first Red Room scene, which arguably is a mental scene that takes place in the mind, takes place in a dream. You have the second Red Room scene, which is physical. Literally, he's physically moved his body into the Red Room. And I think Frost wanted to have that happen, and he wanted Cooper to pay a price. I think Lynch also thought that way, that if now Cooper's going to enter this mental space but enter it physically, he has to pay a price. Lynch and Frost may have thought differently about what that price is, but it was Cooper pays a price. And so I think Lynch might be thinking more like, you are not allowed to physically enter this space. This is a place of the mind. If you do, you're going to pay a price. And Frost was thinking of it perhaps more forensically in terms of just, you're dealing with evil powers. You've gone in there and now you're combating them. You're going to pay a price. Either way, it works. And that is how I'm going to sum up.
That's super cool. And I think, it feels oxymoronic to me to say perfect courage anyway. I mean, those 2 things, because courage is acting in face of fear, right? I mean, so, I always, what this discussion is making me think too is at the end of season 2, like the part that might also, and this is conjecture, so I'll never know, but the part that's perceived by the characters within the show about, like, how would you know if he showed up with perfect courage or not? Because in the end of The Return, the way that he's acting is so weird, and it's not even courageous. It's like, you're not acting with courage if you're not afraid. And that Cooper didn't seem to me to be afraid at all. The one in the end of The Return, at least when he was in the restaurant dealing with the cowboys, it felt very, I don't know, like almost sociopathic in a way, So that question of perfect courage, that's it's a place to chew on a lot. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to exercise some executive privilege.
Do it, Anthony.
Because I want everybody to, I want to respect everybody's time, and I have no idea how long everybody has. And this might be a good time to transition, because I have two different questions here. And essentially what I'm thinking, and it's starting to pour, so let me shut this window.
Wow.
I have some people who I would love for them to watch Twin Peaks, and if they haven't yet, they probably never will. But if they do, they're going to have certain questions on the first go around. And now I have before me all these people who've watched it many times and have thought about it for a long time. So I'd like to pull out some answers and nail some of these questions down for once and for all. So here are the two questions that I have for you. So we have Laura in the red room saying, "I'll see you again in 25 years. Meanwhile," and she does the hand thing. We have references to hibernation and Briggs in season 3. And what does that even mean when she says that? And when she does the hand thing? Yes, I know these are interpretable, but let's nail it down for good if we could. Or we have this other question, and it is what is the red room, or when, or where, or who, or what, or any of these questions could be attached to the concept of the red room. So if anybody wants to either extend what we were just talking about or take these fresh, please jump in.
I'm going to jump in real fast. I think Lynch actually answers your first question in one of the behind the scenes documentaries of The Making of the Return. He explicitly tells McLaughlin, "No time has passed for you." So Cooper, when he comes back, is still in 1989. 25 years have passed outside of that. And this gets to the whole topic of, and I won't go into it in detail, but beginning of our conversation tonight, we were talking about the past. We're talking about, the old show and the new show. And one of the words that we didn't use is nostalgia. And so there's that sense of, are we stuck in the past? Are we present in the present? So anyway, I think at least Lynch's idea is that for Cooper, no time passed. That may be different for different people who might go in. I don't know. I don't know what happened when Andy. Well, he didn't really go to the Red Room. But anyway, as for the Red Room itself, the question, I'm just going to say, I honestly and truly, that is a question I don't think can be answered.
I guess
you want.
I guess when I think of the particularly the hand gesture for Meanwhile, it was, I believe it was his name on Twitter, or I guess now X, was Faded Colossus. And he made this observation that the hand gesture that Laura makes in the season 2 finale, believe it or not, Ronette actually makes at the end of Fire Walk with Me. It's the part where she's knocked unconscious, and Leland, once he gets out of the train, he actually just kind of nudges her over with his foot, and she does like this. And I just feel like Lynch was very deliberate when he did that. And I also think of like with Phoebe Augustine being in part 3, if there's any connection, just because that scene in the beginning of part 3 is like, I think one of the best parts of The Return for me. So when I think of it, I think of like Ronette's role in it, because I think of her as a character where she's much more important than I think people really talk about her. So I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about it, but I think that it pertains to Ronette, at least tangentially.
What is the Red Room? Or when is it? Or where is it? Or
I look at it as I mean, I know this is probably just I guess
how is it? How is this thing?
I think that since it's so omnipresent, that for me, I just kind of like just almost accept it for what it is. It's just like I guess it's almost like, I guess we're looking at Frost because there was a lot of stuff that was going to be pertaining to aliens, at least again tangentially a little bit in season 2. I think of how there's something almost like interdimensional about this, how it exists and how it relates to the woods. Yeah, the Red Room is one where I'm always trying to like think of like why it is the way it is, but yeah, it's I guess for me it's like it is very much timeless in and of itself, and that it just like the rules that apply there do not apply to the world of Twin Peaks or the world in general.
Yeah, Lynch apparently said to Martha Nachemson, the Red Room changes depending on who's in there. So in a way, it really is a reflection of our own psyche.
How so?
I think, you know, I mean, again, Lynch envisioned it as a dream space, I think, initially. Perhaps when you're dreaming, your mind does move to some other, for lack of a better word, a dimension, or it goes to another place. And there is this Red Room, which I think I think Diane went to the Red Room. We know that Laura went to the Red Room. Some of the doppelgangers are in the Red Room. So I do believe it is accessible by multiple individuals, but that each individual perceives it differently. And Lynch may be being very subtle in that we can't always discern whose perception of the Red Room we're seeing.
And is it automatically associated with the Black Lodge? I mean, are those two things inextricably linked?
You know, I think, you know, at the end of season 2, again, Lynch directed and really Lynch scripted, the little man says, this is the waiting room. So I considered it to be some sort of liminal space that perhaps you can pass through it and get to the White Lodge. Perhaps you fail in it, or you pass through it the wrong way and you get to the Black Lodge, but it does not. And I know in a lot of discussion over the many years, and even I think Lynch and Frost have slipped up and referred to it as the Black Lodge. But I think if you really look at what they've put on screen, it does seem to be a space between those two places.
Yes.
At least that works best for me.
Yeah.
So I have to ask Josh for a favor, because Josh is very good at like promotional materials and creating eye-catching stuff and graphic arts and whatnot. And just so you all know, I'm going to clip different pieces of this chat together to present the definitive finalized ultimate take.
Your 4-hour
on all the big questions that you've always wanted to know. So that's
E to A box set.
That's right. Yeah. Like
so I guess,
please.
I guess for me, the answer to that is going to be an emotional one. I mean, one of the things that I got from my work with John on the podcast, we actually had a great one where we talked about the different zones in Twin Peaks: The Return. And one of the questions we asked ourselves were, what are we supposed to be feeling in these places? And as I did the recent revision to the book, I asked myself that in almost every single scene. What am I supposed to be feeling right now? I don't really want to explain what's happening intellectually. So I don't think of the Red Room as an intellectually explainable place anymore, as a estuary where love comes together with fear and mixes with memory and conjecture and strange elements that always somehow make sense in place of the scene, in context of what we're watching. The emotions are always there and they never lie. They're like the music in Twin Peaks. The music never lies to us. It tells us exactly what we're supposed to be feeling, even in its absence. And so that answer to the Red Room question is not an intellectual one to me. It's an emotional one.
Love that.
While we are in the process of nailing things down, you know when Laura's transparent face appears in the doorway to Gordon Cole when he's in the hotel room, what is that?
That's an evil question.
I mean, it reminds me of the scene in King Kong where he's looking through the window. and the people are looking out at him. So I kind of love that. It's like the iconic presence of Twin Peaks, you know. Laura Palmer is as iconic in Twin Peaks as King Kong is.
Well, I've written a little bit about it. There's a lot of crazy things happening to Cole in that particular part. He is sort of coming to realize that there's more to the mystery of this case than even he thought. And so I struggled with that when I was writing about it, because that's a very confusing and difficult scene. But I guess for me, the way I came down on it was that that the trauma of Laura Palmer is still out there. It's still resonating. And this was sort of a literal manifestation of that, and the trauma of the world, the idea, I perceive Judy as being a representation of pain. And so Laura's crying image illustrated to Cole that there was distress in the world, and it was concentrated on what this case was that they were pursuing.
One of the things that I think of how the scene particular that's used, because it is the scene Fire Walk with Me when Laura goes up to Donna asking, "Are you my best friend?" But I also think that it's important that, at least from what I can recall, that it's mirrored as well. So I think of like how there's certain things that are mirrored in The Return. Another Fire Walk with Me example is part 14, when Andy sees the fireman, and you see the two angels, where like one is like what we see in Fire Walk with Me, and the other is mirrored. I kind of took it as that there was like two different realities that are going on, and I know that's a whole different thing in of itself. But I also think of like just the dire straits that Laura is in, because the last time we, I guess, really see her is when she's taken out in part 2, when she just sucked up like into the ceiling effectively. So I think there's something about that Gordon Cole, probably even because the drawing that he's doing at the moment, where he's tapping into something higher. But once again, I don't know if I can fully articulate it, but these are just the things that come to me when I think of that scene.
And today, you know, I happened to, I had to go into the office today, and I was listening to a podcast, and there's a new book recently that came out by a woman named Naomi Klein called Doppelganger. Yep. And right. And so, of course, the title was very curious to me. And so I got to listen to maybe like 15 or 20 minutes of the interview that she was doing with Kara Swisher. And it was fascinating. Of course, the book is not specifically about doppelgangers, but she applies it. And she was talking about how, about doppelgangers and the mirrored world that you have when you're a doppelganger, which of course is a Twin Peaks theme kind of, but you know, the whole part about, like Colin just mentioned, that it's a mirror image of Laura, right? She's flipped the other direction. And so something about it to me was always that I didn't think of it in this way, but but just when Colin said it, was that he opens the door and there's something about it that he sees in himself too. I mean, I feel like throughout The Return, especially, that there's something about Lynch and the actors, you know, that it's not about the characters, but it's his connection to the actual people. I feel like the scene where he's walking with Kyle and Laura Dern, and they're all like kind of marching forward. There's something about the connection of those actual people together that is outside of the world of Twin Peaks. And so I think when he opens the door and he sees her, and he's having, as you all mentioned, he's having perceptions throughout the whole thing. You know, he knows when Diane's going to be at the door. He's right. He's so tuned in. His character has always been a little bit mysterious to me, but that there's something about her character reflects something back to him about himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Josh.
So interesting.
See, Josh thought that was an evil question, but that was you spotted that, no problem.
I'm gonna have to read that Naomi Klein book. I was just looking it up because I've enjoyed some of her. I guess I've never read her books, but I've heard her commentary quite a bit over the years, and Interesting.
For sure, Joel. I would think that, yeah. I mean, just even on the little bit that I know of your tweeting around politics, that it's gonna be a good. I think it's gonna be a very good read.
Is her doppelganger Naomi Wolf? Is that who she's
Correct.
talking about? Okay, I think
Right, because the two of
I thought
them
who else could it be that she would be talking about? That
Yes.
was like her opposite. The people. Okay, that's fine.
100%.
Sorry, you can cut that part out, Anthony.
Yeah.
I had to ask because I read the description while you were describing that, and I was like, that has to be who she's talking about.
Yeah, but I mean, really, in the little bit that she was in
that's
this
funny.
interview, I mean,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is Twin Peaks, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, that's great. Wow.
yeah.
Fascinating.
And of course, with Mark Frost, you know, those two things, that so much of it is, you know, between his theosophical, if that's the way you say it, theosophy, his interests in that and politics, it all kind of mushes together.
Not to go too off topic, but does anybody know how he's progressed on his book he was writing about?
I know, I wonder all the time, Joel.
Is that like, has that actually, I mean, you know, so many people announce projects that then never get done, but it's like,
That's
is that
the
something that's
Krishnamurti,
actually
right?
Krishnamurti? Yeah, I
yeah.
couldn't think of the name. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. I haven't heard any more about it.
Okay. Yeah, because it was in David Bushnell's book, and then you know, the pandemic happened and everyone's brains were scrambled and new things fell away and new things arose. So who knows?
Right.
Including maybe Wisteria, but that's another topic.
I pretty much only know the name Krishnamurti from most directly from Josh, who retweets quotes from Krishnamurti, and those quotes are always really, really interesting.
Awesome. Totally.
And,
Over my shoulders, a brand new.
I'm wondering if Josh or anybody else could.
The next, I was just going to, one last thing, random funny idea I had. The next Barbenheimer is going to be Mark Frost coming out with Krishnamurti at the same time that Lynch comes out with his Maharishi documentary.
Yeah, that's actually a war I've kind of had to bring up to in my TM circles, because I'm a huge Krishnamurti advocate. I've read his stuff for 30 years now, very, very influenced by him. And then, of course, you know, the Maharishi stuff with TM. It's been interesting, but I only approach that.
Does any of that help with my new question that I've added here? Is about Candie, who's the source of endless fascination for me. And I know Colin just had a whole episode devoted to her.
Yeah.
But is understanding Candie perhaps like some sort of key? Is it important, or maybe really important? Anybody? Any thoughts?
I mean, okay, I guess it's I guess like I had a bit of say to about it both with the episode I did this week, and of course the episode I did with you on the Mitchum brothers. I think that actually she's very central to the Vegas storyline. I guess then to give a Cliff Notes version, I think of like how her relationship with the Mitchum brothers, and also the fact that there's Sandy and Mandy, who just kind of seem to kind of be there, but it seems like Candie's called upon more so by far out of the three. So I think that I guess to adhere to the whole Cliff Notes version, I think that she's doing for the Mitchum brothers what up until part 16 Dougie was doing for Janie E and Sonny Jim, where she's very idiosyncratic, maybe even frustrating for people to deal with, but she seems to bring out the best in people. And I think of like in part 17, where we don't really know what Candie does after these events, but I would think that she sticks with the Mitchum brothers, and it brings them from being hardened criminals to being like these guys with a more soft side. And so I think that to look at Candie, you can learn a lot by looking at her and Dougie Jones and vice versa. So again, I'll try to keep it short, but that's my outlook on it.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a sense that really digging down and grasping the Candie character is like, it's not like the final key to the final lock, but I feel like maybe it is like maybe, but probably not. And I understand, I know there's not a final key to a final lock, but the title for this video is going to suggest as much. So it's definitive.
Interesting. Candie always fascinated me. I didn't write enough about her, but I theorized, I guess, to myself that she was the Dougie version of Diane. So you had a Cooper in Dougie.
Can you say that again? Because it muted just for a second. Can you?
I kind of never pursued it, but I thought about the idea that Candie might be the Dougie version of Diane. So Diane is there with Cooper, and they're both these sort of, I don't really want to call them absent, but they are on a different plane than the rest of those of the people around them. And they do seem to exude goodness about, there's a goodness to them both.
That's cool. Run with that a little bit, as far as just like a couple little small details about Candie. Run with that as a possibility.
Anagram Candie, it's Diane C. How's that?
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
She hits one of I forget which Mitchum brother she hits with. I forget which name, what his name is, but it's not Rodney. It's the other guy, or is it Rodney? When she hits him with the
Rodney, yeah.
Yeah, she hits Rodney.
She's terribly upset, and she's devastated with what she's done, because that behavior should not be something that she would do. She actually hurt someone. She's not that kind of being, and you see that in Dougie too. Dougie is, with the exception of Ike to Spike obviously coming out to try to assassinate him, he's not going to harm anyone. He's pure goodness, and I think one of the things I've thought about is that Diane is a haunting presence throughout the return, that Diane is there following Cooper or paralleling Cooper. And so one way of pursuing that idea would be, could she also have been there in Las Vegas with that version of Cooper? At the same time, I would also argue that maybe Janie E is the version of Diane that needs to be there as well. Mm-hmm. They are explicitly connected as being half sisters. So there's something going on there as well. But I think the portrayal of Candie was deliberate to parallel the behavior of Dougie.
Good.
Yeah, I also think it's obvious, but about the childlike behavior. And I think recently there's been a guy that I've been seeing on social media who interviews children, like little kids. It's like at recess, and they say the funniest things that sound ridiculous, but they're just so pure and innocent. And, in that thing when she's talking about how the cars were all lined up, and, when you see a grown-up say things like that, you think, wow, like out to lunch. But if you hear a 5-year-old say it, it seems really normal that a 5-year-old would have a musing about something being so fantastical. So there is that just real pure childlike innocence, that enthusiasm for life. And also too, I think it reminds me too, my very close friend has a young daughter, and she did something that my friend was very unhappy with her about. And she couldn't stop crying. She told me she was so remorseful that she just couldn't, it was like she was just inconsolable because she felt so bad that she hurt her mom. And so I think about that when she hits Rodney, and then she's inconsolable, right? She feels like you said, John, she just can't believe that she did something to make her daddy so upset,
I think it's really
at the end of to say part 17, where she comes in and obviously something big is going down, and there's all these people, and it's dramatic, and there's a dead body on the floor, and she's like, well, I'm glad sandwiches. That's her response to it. I can help out with these sandwiches.
Right. So funny.
Yeah, and I'm gonna bookmark one question for later, and that is, she gives Rodney the cut with the remote control, and then later that cut has sort of like mysteriously or magically disappeared, and I'm wondering if somebody had like a remote control of sorts to remove that cut, or how that happened. But we could get into that later. But
I have a few sort of like almost like footnotes, like they're disconnected musings on this subject. Mm-hmm. One of them is, I'm kind of fascinated. So like John and many others, certainly like Cameron Cloutier and all these other people, they watched Twin Peaks when it was on, and they have these stories of what people thought while it was on. And I'm always fascinated by that because I missed it, and that I was like 6 or 7, although I've since learned that Andrew Grievous, who runs 25 years later, was younger than me. He was 5 and he watched it at the time, which like boggles my mind. That's like a weird like paradox. Like this person who was younger than me somehow watched Twin Peaks in 1990. Anyways, that's a side subject.
He was smoking a pack and a half a day at that point.
Yeah, right. I don't know what his mother was smoking to let him watch it. So anyways, though, so it kind of fascinates me. You and Colin are in a somewhat similar situation with The Return, where you caught up with it after the fact. So like there was these things that like people talked about while it was on that I feel like once it got quote unquote resolved at the end of the show, kind of never came up again. But one of them was this theory that Candie was the Dougie version, like John was saying, but of Laura rather than of Diane. So like I don't know if people thought that literally she was gonna like manifest into Laura at the end of the series or what, but it was like this was like a very I remember like I was a guest on a podcast around part 10, and that like came up, that subject of like, is she really, it's like she Laura in disguise or whatever and all this stuff. So it's I don't know that again, these are like non sequiturs, but I thought that was kind of funny. And then John did actually touch on one of the things I was going to mention, which was he was talking about Candie as like a manifestation of Diane, and then the idea that, well, of course, Jane E is in some ways the most obvious kind of candidate for that in Las Vegas. So I don't know. I don't have anything to add to what he said about that. I just find that kind of fascinating. Then the other thing was this idea of I had a brain fart. Hold on a second. What John also mentioned about the names, that Candie is like a weird anagram for Diane. And there was some conversation, I can't remember which one it was because we had a million of them, but John and I like went down a rabbit hole at one point of like how all of these characters' names are like weird. Like you can like add a letter or take a letter away from Diane, and you can make Candie, you can make Annie, you can make Carrie, you can make like all these different characters. And then if you take the letters that you like take away from the names, they like form Caroline or something. It's bizarre. But anyway, so yeah, random spurts of thoughts. Yeah. And I have a thought on
please.
Or sorry, if you want to lead into that, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Well, we were talking for a moment, I think off mic or whatever, about things that we thought when we initially saw the series. And then, as we went on and watched the rest of it, if that lingered with us. Something that always struck me, I went into Twin Peaks under the mistaken impression, and I do not remember when this changed, but I went into it with the impression that the mystery was never resolved, that like the show was canceled before they answered the question of who killed Laura Palmer, and that was like left hanging forever. So I kind of thought that's what it was going to be, and I'm always fascinated, and I get a flavor of this sometimes when I rewatch the pilot, this idea of Twin Peaks as something like almost akin to, I guess you'd say, Inland Empire, because I think many Lynch's films, they do have like a particular reading that's stuck, like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive kind of do. But like Inland Empire, you still, there's a million theories of what the hell is going on there, and nobody's ever quite totally resolved it. And maybe now with The Return, Lynch has restored that sense to Twin Peaks. But when I rewatch the pilot, I'm struck by this idea of like, what if the show hadn't been picked up? He'd left it with that cryptic ending in the Red Room or something, or whatever, or just as the open-ended TV pilot, and it would have such a different connotation of like this idea of like you can't know the mysteries of the universe in some way, like that, versus where it gets to, which I think is equally brilliant in its own way, maybe more brilliant, where he goes with it in like episode 14 in Firewalk with Me, when he's forced to answer the question. I think, I've argued many times that his whole career, his whole kind of sensibility changes dramatically at that point, where he's almost forced to answer that question. But that is something that that I think of sometimes going back to the earliest viewings of Twin Peaks, my earliest understandings of it is thinking that it was open-ended and unresolved.
Has that been resolved? Has that question, I mean, I'm sorry to be that guy. Has that question of who killed Laura Palmer, has that been like definitively resolved?
Well, I think the question of like the Leland Bob entanglement, as fascinating as that is a different question than what I thought, what I presumed going in was going to leave us, which is almost anything, anybody, like you. And also this is, I think, a key thing. I talked already about the passage of time, but there's like a very paradoxical element to that with the return, which is the like reversibility of time. And I think those two things are tied together. So you asked before, it never got to me. I think only Colin went under the Inquisitor's thumb, but it was that question of like, put this into a sentence, put it into a sentence. And like the thing I thought of was the passage of time erodes endings. And for me, the significance of that is I felt like Fire Walk with Me was very much an ending to the Twin Peaks cycle. And I still kind of feel that way, but you have to now twist around to get back there because, the return leads you in different directions. And I just feel generally like I never was unsatisfied with season 2 finale as an ending. It felt like for most of the characters, and Fire Walk with Me as an ending for Laura Palmer and Twin Peaks as a whole, and maybe in some weird way Cooper. I always felt like the season 2 finale kind of felt appropriate in a way of putting these characters in these places and leaving them there. And there was something final about it. Mark Frost had an interview in like 2010 or 2011 where he says, Twin Peaks is sort of like Sopranos. It ends, but it doesn't finish. And then he says, or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe it finishes and it doesn't end. But, there was this idea that like you have some sort of dramatic crescendo that's reached in the season 2 finale. And I think by coming back and Fire Walk with Me in a different way. And then I think by coming back to it in season 3, for me, and again, this would be different for both Anthony and Colin watching it after the fact and kind of all at once. But for me, it was like, now, and I thought of what word to use. I'm like, does it erase the ending? Does it eradicate the ending? Well, not exactly, but it does erode it. It does kind of give a sense of like, with the passage of time, whatever resolution you thought you had is now kind of slowly worn down. Here's Shelley and Bobby. They're not in love and together anymore. They're at the diner, but there's something new going on. Here's, Andy and Lucy. They are a little more, they are kind of on the same plateau they reached at the end of season 2, but still they've aged. Their son has been born, grown, moved away, whatever, is going on with him and all these other characters. It's like, well, life just sort of continues. You don't have these sort of endings until, you die in life. And that's an interesting thing the return does. And at the same time, it does another thing, which is instead of just saying time inexorably marches on and, erases whatever sense of conclusion you thought you had or closure, it also does this thing where it almost applies that logic to the past. It says, and in addition to that, you can go back. So maybe it's not a paradox. Maybe it's a continuation of that idea. You can go back into the past and change the past and change what that meant, and therefore change the present so that the present, and we can get into all of that if you want, final dossier and all those ideas. But there is this idea that like, it's almost complementary in a way. Now that I think of it in that sense, it's like by carrying on in time and eroding that sense of finality, that sense of closure, you're also changing what the past meant. And they make that literal within the plot, but I think there's also kind of a conceptual way in which it's true.
I guess on the topic of time, because I think of this is going to tie back to where we're talking about the Red Room in particular. But to me, the final scene in all of Twin Peaks is the last scene, Fire Walk with Me. And I remember me and Shirley Ladder, we actually talked about it. And one thing that
I agree as well. For me personally, yeah.
And one thing to add credence to it was that I think it was in 1991, Shirley Ladder was like, I think she was like running the UK's Debbie Harry fan club. And the thing that's worth addressing is that there was this rumor that came and went around the time in 1991 that Debbie Harry was going to play a quote unquote older Laura Palmer. And there was no context to it. It was just that was just something that just kind of came up. And so Shirley Ladder, like at some point after Fire Walked with Me, she thought, oh, this must have been the scene. So for her, that was something like very early on that made her think that, yes, this is the final scene in all of Twin Peaks. And of course, you know, it's like I know that Joel, I think you do it. I know Stephen Miller did it before the return, where he'd watch the original series and end with Fire Walk with Me, viewing it more as a sequel rather than a prequel. I think in that regard. So yeah, it's I don't know if there's much I can build off beyond that, but I just felt like it was important, worth mentioning, is that even with the return, that for all the faults and foibles that I think Cooper has, that we do still get that ending. And for me, coming back to part 14 with that picture of Laura and then the angel and then the mirrored angel, I look at it as like two realities, and that like even the other reality that Laura will still get that angel.
So there's that great William Faulkner quote that the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. And I think the idea of the return is ridiculous because there is no return. What is it that returns? Everything's different. Nothing is the same. There is no concept of actual returning. So to call it the return was probably the biggest fake on the viewer, I think. But I will say that there is a character that we don't often talk about in Twin Peaks: The Return, and that is the viewer. The viewer, as John has written about as well, is an active participant in orchestrating and pulling all of this stuff together. There is no character in Twin Peaks: The Return that pulls all of this together. It is the viewer that does it. It's certainly not the director. It's not any of the characters, including Cooper. He has no idea what's going on at the end, and he would be the only one left. And in fact, what we see is a trail of dissemination where, you know, if we were to call fault on what happened at the end of season 2, I would not say it was the failure of Imperfect Courage. I would say it was the failure to release his baggage. That was the very first episode John and I talked about in our house, was the baggage that we bring. And there's that lovely concept in Egyptian Book of the Dead mythology that when you die and your soul is weighed against a feather, if your heart is heavier than a feather, you fail and you go into the underworld. So that test of, you know, who's he attached to? Who's he going to save? Which of these princesses, Caroline or Annie or Laura, is he going to save? That was the moral failure to even make the choice. You know, that it's a very Buddhist concept, right? The concept of enlightenment means that you have given up both desire and fear and you walk between that path. I find that to be very fascinating. I think it's a core theme that I take out of The Return. It's definitely something that I think about all the time, especially in relation to season 3.
Can you say just a little bit more about that desire, fear, middle path thing?
So the
explain
Buddha
that.
taught that. Yeah, the Buddha taught that it's attachment to the things of the world that actually root us here. And so to achieve nirvana, you actually have to relinquish all attachment to life, whether it's the people you love or the people you hate, or the joys that you get or the sorrows. To be enlightened is to be above those things and to release, to be transcendent of those things. And Cooper was never that. I mean, that was his failure. And in fact, I do agree with John. He failed in the end. Those choices that he made in the end still led him to this point where he had nothing left. There was no mission. There was no girl. There was nothing. He didn't even have a concept, sense of self, or even the mission was gone. So I think that if we were to think of characters that sit above at a meta level in The Return, the Fireman's obviously there. And I would say that Major Briggs is there as these kind of shepherding agents. And they pushed Cooper into a track that was for his own good, where he tried to save the damn girl once again, and they knew he would. And eventually it led him to a point where he had nothing left and there was nothing left to do but release. And that's what we get with the Fade to Black. At least that's what I get out of the Fade to Black. So I think I look at it as a much more Eastern point of view on this idea of detachment and releasing baggage.
Can I ask a question of the group?
Yes, sir.
And relates to what I talked to Josh about before.
Are there any objections to Joel asking the group right now?
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Why do people think, or what do you make of Leland being the one who tells Cooper to find Laura in the return? And that's all he does. Apparently, there were rumors that like Ray Wise was supposed to have a bigger party, got to set, shot his scene. They were like, thanks, you're a wrap. And he was like, what? And he's been sort of upset about it. But, you know, for better or worse, that's his part in the return. Like, what do you make of that? I guess I'd be interested to hear people talk about.
I guess I'll start. I think that first it's worth mentioning about Cooper is that I think that Leland saying find Laura, that's the major crux of why we get to what we get to in part 17 in terms of why he feels like he has to rescue her. But I think the one thing that's worth mentioning is that Leland is just sitting in this chair for an indefinite period of time. I think there's some about the passivity and also the fact that he can't quite confront what he's done yet. I think it comes back to the whole idea of imperfect courage where you stay in the lodge, where I think there's something about when he dies that it does seem like he does talk about it as if he was possessed by Bob, but there's a lack of accountability still. Like, for example, I was talking about Scott Ryan a few months back where we had this ambiguity of like whether it was Maddie and Laura were killed by Bob or Leland. But we came to the conclusion that Teresa, she was unquestionably killed by Leland because one, he had the motivation, and two, she never saw Bob in that scene. So I think there's something about how he's not going to confront like the worst, darkest aspects of himself, hence why he's effectively confined to the Red Room.
Well, I will just jump in quickly. I got to be careful because I've written so much about it and I've talked about it with most of you already. So I do think, you know, again, I have a very particular take on what happens in the return, so I won't get into it in great detail. But I do think Leland says find Laura because that's what Cooper's mission is. He's got to find Laura and deliver her to a certain time and place. And so Leland is just being explicit about it, whereas the fireman, you know, was not. The fireman was being cryptic, as the fireman will be, or perhaps that's the way Cooper perceived it. But anyway, find Laura is literal. He's to go find her, not save her, which Cooper thinks he has to save her. He's just got to find her and get her someplace. But anyway, I mean, I could really expand on that. But
well, let me ask, why Leland though? Like, why would Leland be the one to say that?
I would say that Leland was the one to say that because he's still trying to find some way to atone for what his role was in the whole history of Laura, and if he could do anything to help her fulfill her mission, then he was going to do it.
That's interesting because I feel like that's almost you and Josh almost have like opposite takes there, in a sense, from what Josh just said. I'm calling for a new In Our House Now episode immediately. Yeah. Season 3, make it happen.
of taking Laura Palmer to her home as if it were some element of safety. That is the worst place you could have taken her. That was literally where the monster lived who raped and murdered her. It's so absurd on its surface, but somehow there's a subtext there, to John's point, find Laura and take her home is the unspoken part of that, at least in Cooper's mind towards the end. The idea of solving the murder, it was done. They figured it out. From a legal perspective, it was wrapped up and buttoned up. Why the need to progress further to understand why it happened? Now, we know how it happened. We know what happened. But why the need to understand why it happened? I think it's a really interesting component to Twin Peaks. That is, it makes it different than every other CSI or murder mystery. I'm watching Columbo now. They never mention that shit in Columbo. I can tell you that right now. Why? And that's what makes Twin Peaks different, I think.
Well, a total side note: if Spielberg had directed Episode 8 as he was originally planned to on Twin Peaks, he would have directed an episode of both Columbo and Twin Peaks. But I digress.
Cool.
Two real quick comments. It's funny that you mentioned the difference between Josh and I, because Josh and I, it seems like when we talk, it seems like we're completely opposite, but in fact, we're so parallel. It's kind of remarkable. But I guess I was going to make another point about bringing Laura home. I think that's Cooper's mistake there. I think Cooper thought he needed to do that, and he didn't need to do that. I think bringing her there was probably the trigger that was required for her to scream, and that scream is essential. And again, I'm going on a very specific theory, which most of you have probably heard me talk about before, and I'm not going to go into it again. But I think one other comment too is, and it probably deflates all of our thrill about Twin Peaks, just like what Josh is talking about, thinking about how it connects to this story from before the first season and the second season, and how it resonates through Firewalk with Me, and I don't discount that at all. I believe all of that is there, but I also believe that Lynch and Frost both, perhaps maybe Lynch a little more, kind of were like, I don't really need to revisit what happened in those other. This is a different story, it's just sort of Twin Peaks. The original material was sort of just foundational, and they're building a new story on top of it. And I don't want to dismiss it, but I think sometimes we can get trapped by trying too hard to make it all fit together. Whereas in The Return, Lynch he had a story that I think thrilled him, and it somewhat tangentially connected to what and he was willing to actually revise it to some extent and say, okay, well, this happened, but now this happened. And they don't have to connect. So
let me ask you: do you think if probably not Frost, because I think he came up with the idea and came to Lynch with it, but do you think if Lynch could have made a mini series or feature film without tying it to Twin Peaks, gotten the funding and done it, that he would have?
All right.
Instead of The Return, let's say. Like, do you think The Return was kind of an excuse for him to explore all of these different story ideas and themes and images? And because Twin Peaks, at a time when IP was the thing, and reboots were the thing, that it allowed him to do that's what he tied it to, but that theoretically this could have been something else, if that makes sense? It's an odd question to ask, but
no, it's an excellent question to ask. And I do think, yes, I think that there's two components to it. If he had gotten the money and the funding and the cast and a network behind him, or the streaming service behind him, would he have done it? Yes, but only if he had what he would say is the idea that spurred him on, that got him thrilled with exploring something new. And I don't think he was thinking about Twin Peaks at all. I don't think he was interested in returning to Twin Peaks at all. And Frost came to him, and Frost said, Cooper wakes up in an empty house. And that was just the light bulb for Lynch. And then once Lynch went back into the world, he ran with it, and it became as much about Lynch's interests as it did about Twin Peaks. So you got Sonny Jim's room decorated. That was David Lynch's childhood bedroom. You've got references to Kafka. You've got references to Francis Bacon. You've got references to Edward Hopper, literal scenes that are remakes of Edward Hopper paintings. These are all things that Lynch loved, and he had suddenly this chance to indulge himself, and he took it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's hard to disentangle because his opportunity to explore all of the ideas that he had, kind of, you know, the eclectic ideas that maybe he couldn't get funding for, but also he didn't. I don't know. I mean, I assume that what was that screenplay he had written? Somebody said, "Oh, this is the best screenplay I've ever written." It was like, or read. It was like 2008, 2009, or whatever. You know, post Inland Empire, and but he couldn't get the funding for it. I can't remember what the name of it was. I kind of doubt that it was like, you know, 50% or 90% Twin Peaks: The Return, and that he just put those ideas into Twin Peaks. So, like, you know, for whatever reason, Frost's idea of Cooper waking up in the house was like the core that all this other, you know, that all this other stuff could like accrete around. So it is, in a weird way, it's sort of hard to separate. Lynch had these non-Twin Peaks ideas, and Lynch had a reason to return to Twin Peaks from one another. You know, as with all Twin Peaks, there's no simple answer.
There's no simple answer, and I think it just evolved. I think it evolved beyond what they had originally intended. It was supposed to be 9 hours. It was probably going to be tighter. It was going to be, you know, a different kind of show. And then Lynch got the money and got the freedom, and he took it. He expanded it.
Yeah, and the passage of time aspect only works because it's a follow-up to Twin Peaks. So that there is that as well. Something that's so core to the show is a function of it being a, you know, reboot or follow-up or whatever you want to call it. So you can't take that away either.
I think they were trying to subvert the whole idea of nostalgia and fan service too. They wanted to address the idea of this isn't Twin Peaks and it's exactly Twin Peaks.
If anybody, and that's a big if anybody's listening to this and can't see, they would not see that I threw a few questions on the shared screen. And these are just floating questions. If anybody wants to take the conversation where you want it to go or address any of these questions, all good. But
I'm seeing you revise it in real time. So I was like, yeah, well, the zone is connected to the Double R Diner. And then you're like, oh, the bedroom. I see.
So if anybody wants to play along at home, the questions are, who is the Arm and what can we say about his evolution? What's with all the spotlights in Twin Peaks? That's definitely something that kind of confused or baffled me. Similarly,
this is a good question.
The curtains, the drapes, the blinds, be they.
You could put 2 and 3 together, I think, in a way. The theatrical element.
Oh, okay. Be they noisy or silent. And then what is the deal with the zone, which is like probably my favorite set, possibly my favorite setting. It's just, I love it. Is it related to the Red Room in any way, or like just generally what's the deal? I know it's located on Sycamore, but that doesn't mean anything. So any thoughts on any of these, or if, you know, like I said, take it in any direction?
I guess for the first one is that for who is the Arm? Actually, I think John, you brought it up in Wrapped in Plastic, where it didn't cross my mind until you mentioned it, but it was in Fire Walk with Me when the one-armed man and the man from another place, when they're in the Red Room, right when Bob/Leland is there. And then the thing is that the man from another place puts his hand onto the one-armed man where his left arm would have been, and says, "Bob, I want all my Garmin-Bosia." And there's something about with that, and then also in season 2 when Mike, he says that he cut the whole arm off. So I think it's just that like the arm, I guess, effectively represents the evil that he was that him and Bob did, and how he cut that off. But the fact that they're working together, and to build off of to his evolution, I think of how at the end of season 2, when the man from another place says, "Next time you see me, it won't be me," and like literally, it's like something different. But it's worth addressing that it's it's a tree that also has like electricity run through it, and it seems like there's wind coming through a place that otherwise is not windy. It's like this culmination of all these things that that to me that I gravitate to in Lynch's filmography at large. So actually, I guess I'll just say, I'll let everyone, if they have thoughts to say, please go for it, because I just want to set that up as the groundwork of like what I see when I see the Arm, and like why we see him the way he is in the Return.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I just found it so confusing. So I appreciate any insight. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Well, just the idea that the Arm was the personification of literally Mike's missing arm, and Colin said it all. Say he cut it off, it was evil. It decided to go ally itself with Bob because that's the part of Mike that was already allied with Bob to begin with, and they continued on, gathering Garmon Bozia, and so sort of a literal take, I think. And again, I'm sorry, these are sort of deflating answers, but the evolution of the Arm is they couldn't get Michael J. Anderson to do the role. They wanted him, and Lynch being Lynch, same thing with Phillip Jeffries. A different reasoning for why David Bowie couldn't obviously participate, but Lynch just had put some sort of abstraction in to represent that character. So the Arm becomes a tree with a brain, I guess, and Phillip Jeffries becomes a giant tea kettle, because why not?
I love the idea. I can't remember who said it, but somebody pointed out that it's like the brain also could be like chewing gum, like that gum you like is coming back into style, sitting on top of the tree.
Actually, John, I guess I have one question, because I was mentioning that you mentioned that obviously Michael J. Anderson, he couldn't be there because of a lot of that behind the scenes stuff. But when it comes to everything pertaining to the tree-like quality, the electricity, the wind, do you think that those elements would have been found within the Arm had Michael J. Anderson been in the Return?
That's a great question. I mean, who knows how Lynch would have. We see Philip Gerard back pretty much the same way he was when we saw him in the original series. So I think odds are Michael J. Anderson would have had that little red suit on, because it's just so iconic. He might have done some interesting things with it, though. But the fact that he did what he did, like you say, with the electricity and the wind and the whispery voice, in some ways, it gives us so much more than it would have had Michael J. Anderson been.
Well, I also had the thought, and I feel like this has been discussed before too, but I sometimes get the sense that almost all of the stuff that quote unquote Phillip Gerard, which itself is weird because it's like, isn't this Mike? Is this really Phillip Gerard? I would think this was the Spirit Mike, but he doesn't. I don't know. It's confusing. Anyways, I sometimes get the sense that he was only going to appear in part 17, and all of that stuff would have been done by Michael J. Anderson. Like all of the like guiding stuff in the Red Room and speaking to him from beyond the realm. Like I can't. I know I've either discussed this with someone or I've heard someone discuss it, but I can't remember where. But like I kind of have the sense that like they expanded, and I feel like Al Strobel had a quote at some point that kind of alluded to that, of like, oh, I got to do much more than I thought, or something like that. Like they brought his character much more into it to replace what the man from another place would have done.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever been to any of his art shows. I got very lucky and got to see one. It was on display in a gallery near my office in Hollywood. It was totally random. And when I went to see it, one of the things I thought of was the evolution of the Arm, because a lot of that, especially the brain part of it, I mean, a lot of Lynch's art has big, clumpy, weird materials in it, and the way that it looked. I mean, it reminds me of The Baby. There's he has so many recurring themes of his art throughout his art, right? So there is that. There's that too. But
Yeah,
Joel, I like what you're saying because it makes total sense. Even though for me, like I can't imagine now it not being Al Strobel being the guide.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Philip Gerard thing too is weird to me because it's like, for me, the distinction has been, and I think about this because I did like a whole character, or am doing over a million years, this character series of like different characters in Twin Peaks and how you delineate them. And I kind of make a distinction between Mike the Spirit, which would be when he's in the Red Room, and Philip Gerard being the host in the real world. And it throughout the return, and actually in Firewalk with Me as well, he's credited as Philip Gerard. And I think people, John, maybe you had a commentary on this or something, but like people have interpreted it as like, oh no, actually that's the host. Like he died and now he's helping Cooper out in the Red Room or something. Like I don't know. It's just, it's one more wrinkle to all of these weird mythological complications in Twin Peaks.
I think just one quick commentary on that, and I won't go into great detail. I do think it's one of the one aspect of the entire Twin Peaks narrative that was the least thought through, and that is that I don't think Lynch or
Thank you. Yes.
what Mike and Philip Gerard are. And so I don't think they understood it when they started it. It was just a fugitive reference. We got a one-armed man. And then there was a Mike Bobby, and Mike and Bobby will have a reflection, same names. And then it just kept evolving, and then no one ever really tried to tie it down. Even Frost, who always tried to tie things down, just sort of said, forget it.
Like, why does the host look exactly the same as the spirit? Come on.
Right.
I mean, there's theories that like the little man, the man from another place, is the actual Mike, and you can take it in interesting directions, but it is clear that they were winging it.
You got away from them.
So I guess, that's all interesting. I would say, what is the purpose that he serves is probably the more interesting question. I'm not as concerned about why they made the choices they made. I'm more concerned about what's on the screen and how do we deal with it. And I think it's very clear that Philip Gerard in The Return is a benevolent agency for Cooper. He acts in Cooper's best interest throughout the entire return. So for me, I just think like I'm satisfied with understanding like, oh, this is one of the good guys. He's on Cooper's team and he serves specific functions along the way, mostly to kind of relate news from the liminal space or whatever the Red Room serves as there, and then to actually physically guide him down the hallway and into this chamber of memory where they can indeed manipulate time. He's there by his side as a representative. I think that's always important to keep in mind, is what we actually get on the screen.
I do love the idea, and I don't, as John and I have talked about this before, one of my favorite essays on Twin Peaks: The Return is Tim Kreider's essay, where he basically theorizes like Cooper is the murderer, and actually he's Philip Gerard is the murderer, and he's like made up Cooper in his mind as like, and I don't quote unquote buy it. Like that's not my reading of the narrative, but I love the lens that it offers. I feel like a lot of interesting stuff comes out of that.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Perhaps unlike Philip Gerard, who might have been a good idea that was thrown on the table and then maybe never dealt with in such a deliberate way. Number one here that I've added to our list. This was deliberate. I have to believe.
Yeah, thank you for that. I noticed that you had a different number one before, right?
I did. We just discussed it. So
okay.
I replaced it.
I like this one. I'm curious to hear what people have to say about this.
I mean, this is from part 18. There has to be some intention. There has to be some deliberateness to this. So there's the 430 number, the 430 miles that they drive before they supposedly cross over. And then there's this idea with the two motels that Cooper and Diane, or Richard and Linda, et cetera, that they are in. And a friend of mine, Joseph Polidoris, who I chatted with about like the sound design in Twin Peaks. He's wicked cool when it comes to Twin Peaks stuff and other stuff. Anyway, he pointed out to me that just because two scenes are side by side in the text, it doesn't mean they're side by side in time necessarily. So he had this idea that those two scenes were just different. You know, they were just from different portions in the story. And I thought that was really an interesting idea, that perhaps, you know, the second scene took place way earlier or way later. You know, when Richard gets the letter from Linda. But does anybody else have something that could really like nail this down for us? Because this is one of the great mysteries, I think, in The Return, and certainly in the mysterious part 18. Thoughts on that?
For me, this is, I guess, a bit of a non-answer, but even after doing my Diane episode, I've come to the realization that the more I think about it, the less I can actually grasp it. Because I'm one of those people where it's like I always like to try to have at least a broad stroke of how I feel about something. But the more I think about the logistics of going from Glastonbury Grove to the car, even just like how they get the car is something that I just like. The one day I just had this tick. I was like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. And then, like, you know, there's this kind of arbitrary proximity of 430 miles and then leading to the Odessa world. I know this is a lot of buildup for a non-answer, but what I thought like made sense in my head, like when I first watched it, and even on rewatches, but this year I was like, I just have to concede that I really just need to like think this through before I dive back in The Return.
Can relate.
You bring up a great point, Colin, and I struggled with it a lot when I was writing about it because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, at least sense we would apply. That doesn't mean it doesn't make sense, I guess, in a Lynchian world. But you're right. The car appears out of nowhere. They're in the desert. They were in Glastonbury Grove. I mean, I just sort of dismissed it all as being essentially in Cooper's mind. You know, the word miles is never used in relation to 430. So miles is a completely arbitrary. Why couldn't it be 430 inches? I mean, you know, but Cooper says this is it, 430 miles.
I guess one thing that's that I was, even the very first time I watched part one, and I'm not even talking about part one, I'm talking about the first 5 minutes, but when the fireman says like 430, Richard and Linda, he's getting all these clues. When Cooper says, I understand, even like without even getting the return, I was like, how? Like how? Like what could possibly make him think that he can constantly say he gets it? And I think when you watch part 18, it's hard to believe that he got it. So
no, he didn't get it. He thinks he's more than he is. He didn't want. He was impatient. He's like, I understand, and he went, and he didn't understand. He was far away.
Right.
Maybe
he was far away.
I could argue he did understand, which I'm not going to argue too strongly, but and at the risk of
I can remember the first time I watched it, actually looking up what gas prices were at the time, and where Maersk trucks, like he drives by a Maersk truck thing, and I'm looking at that, the difference in the cars that he drives. I mean, there's like a 17-year difference, I think it was, or something like that, in between the car he drove into that old motel with and the like Buick or whatever it was he drove out of there with. It makes sense. It's dream logic. Of course it doesn't. So to me, that's
and the
all.
Car, doesn't it? It sort of relates. The car relates to the secret history, right? Doesn't Dougie Milford buy a? I can't remember the car, but there's a he buys a black. It's a Man in Black kind of car, right? That Dougie Milford drives. I don't know. I always associate those two things, but also too. I mean, this is another. You know, like my special sauce during The Return was like just soaking up everyone else's theories, because I just appreciate it so much, and I love puzzle pudding, but I wouldn't say that I'm adept at actually coming up with those things. My thing was looking up the useless information, like the little details that might mean absolutely nothing, but one of them was Maersk, because I was really curious, why did they focus so much on that? And I found when I did my little research, right, that there's and the story is a little murky, but the owner, somebody who was related to the company, named one of his ships the Laura. Like that was there's a connection in there to the name, because I was like, it's just a little piece of dumb, return trivia, but yeah. But that whole timing thing, I mean, my husband and I just watched 16, 17, and 18 over the weekend, and it's always the same question, like, how the frick, what year is it? What day where did the car come from? Like, how are they going? We have the same questions every time, because there is a gap there, a big thing for you to just,
I have a huge whiteboard, and I was writing dates all over, and I'm trying to get 97, and I took a picture of it and I put it on Twitter, and I actually asked Mark Frost, I'm like, did your whiteboard look anything like this? And his response was, I don't own a whiteboard.
That's perfect.
There you go.
So, I guess we were kind of touching up on it more so about the original series, but I'm sure that we all at one point had this, because we were talking about the original series where it's like a day by day sort of thing, where it's like over the course of a month. But I couldn't have been the only one that, I believe it's in part 15. That's when Mr. C goes to see Phillip Jeffries. Like, was that you that called me 5 days ago? And there's this thing where I was like, this is all in 5 days? Like, how? And I know that there's a lot of globetrotting, but there's just so much to unpack. Like, when you think of like the magnitude, at least for how I look at the magnitude of analysis I apply to the return compared to the original series, so like the sense of time is something that I really gravitate towards when I think of the return.
Yeah.
Well, there's a fascinating whole little like almost like subculture around figuring out the chronology of the return. Like around 2017, 2018, when I was writing my character entries, I like looked into this a lot, and I kind of came up with my own system that worked, but it was like very heavily based off like a DUGPA post, like the DUGPA message boards, RIP, where they had like somebody broke it down, like because every episode, it's weird. So like every episode is like a mishmash of chronology. Like you have Bobby saying like 5 episodes after he had the scene with his mother, oh, I found something out about my father today. He gave me, and it was like, wait, today? That was like 5 episodes ago. So like, it seems like they just shot stuff randomly, but at the same time, they're wearing costumes that match with certain scenes. Like, there was some sort of continuity that the script supervisor had on set. So it's like, what is the actual chronology? And in a way, you can never quite work it out. Like, it's supposed to be sort of paradoxical and confusing, but it is sort of fun to tease out, like, when does each part take place?
Yeah, I need to jump in because I have all these questions
you want to keep going
simultaneously. Not even the ones I had written down, but like, oh boy. Well, first we're gonna figure out what year this is in a little bit, but also
yeah, good luck with that.
when he does say that, it does I think it does unlock something in Carrie or Laura, and it does allow her, in my opinion, based on the acting and stuff, her reaction to it, her surprise and the confusion or something, her chin like almost raised defiantly, like all in order, her scream. He did something there in that question, I think, that was successful in some way. But anyway, what my friend Joseph was pointing out with the 2 motel scenes side by side, that they're not necessarily, like in time order, just because they show up on the screen that way. I felt that was, for me, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense, because it's, it's a text that could be edited and moved around. And the fun question I have in the back of my mind was, do you think all of the scenes of the return, if they were placed in a different order, the show could be still just as awesome? And then, but that's not really a question for now. And then secondly, like, that taught me something about how we could possibly watch this show, especially when we're stuck. Things that don't make sense placed side by side. Well, maybe they're not necessarily side by side. And similarly, there's a part where Lucy doesn't understand how cell phones work when Frank walks in and she falls over, and then she's like kind of crying to Andy about it. There's something where they talk about, like, is it about the bunny? No, it's not about the bunny. And I realize I'm rambling. There's something where they have the congressman's dilemma. And in my opinion, all of these scenes are like maybe possibly trying to teach us something about how to like watch the show, or maybe trying to teach us something about how to interpret the show. Does that sound reasonable to anybody, or could you take that somewhere?
As for the congressman's dilemma, I think, John, I think you might have said at one point, and it's something that I've taken into consideration, is that I think that because I'm pretty sure that's the first scene we have with Gordon Cole, and it's like this list of just random stuff that's like, all right, everyone get to work. And there is probably something that's like this stuff that it doesn't make any sense. It's probably that like maybe there's something to be said, and that's why sometimes I try to, especially when I do episodes where I'm like, am I getting too pedantic? Am I reading too far into this? I do think of the congressman's dilemma every now and then. It's like, okay, maybe I need to like scale it back every now and then. Maybe I need that introspection.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the congressman's, I wrote about it. I think the congressman's dilemma is almost like a meta commentary from Lynch and Frost that said, you know, here's a bunch of interesting clues. Good luck trying to put them together because you can't.
I will say though, is that I think that when it comes to Lynch and Frost, like not even just with The Return, but I'm thinking of like when they created the pilot initially, I believe it was David Lynch. He said to Dwayne Dunn is that, hey, you know, the studio will never pick this up, but let's have fun with it. And Lynch put in a great deal of work for 90 minutes that I don't think, because he's never come across as the type of person that's ever phoned in anything for a second in his life. And there's a lot of stuff that he does in The Return, like, for example, the amount of screen time that Gordon Cole gets, because Gordon Cole, like, you know, you look at like what Lynch did behind the scenes, like writing, directing, sound design, and he didn't really have to, like, he could have been, like, he would have easily been forgiven if like Gordon Cole had like a cameo of sorts, but he really put himself in there. So that's kind of my counter argument, is that yes, we have the congressman's dilemma where it's like, don't read too far into it. But then on the other end, you have Lynch where he made this 18-hour movie and he was there, like, you know, in the nitty gritty from day, you know, from the first day of writing to the last day of post-production. So yeah, it's kind of a weird balance.
He's a big ham. David Lynch.
Like, or like the behind the scenes when it showed him creating the spout for Phillip Jeffries', I guess, the tea kettle, is that he really gets on his hands and knees, like he just goes all in. And so yeah, again, like I know I'm just kind of repeating myself, but I guess I want to ask, like, does anyone else kind of think of this in terms of if they think they're reading too far into it? And also what it says about Lynch, about how far he goes to, you know, put his mark into his films and art?
Well, I can tell you, I went to see him probably the year, maybe like 6 months before the shutdown happened. Ringo Starr was on a book tour for his photo book, and they did a night at the Fonda Theater with David Lynch and Ringo Starr and
That's amazing.
Josh, you may know, it was, who's the famous photographer that does all the musicians? He's so famous. I can't think of his name. He did. David Lynch wrote the foreword to the book, and
is it Herb Ritts?
No, it's not Herb Ritts. No, he shot the Baby James album cover and the very famous Crosby, Stills and Nash. You'll know his name if you hear it. I can't think of it, but anyway, the three of them were there, and so it was a fantastic night. I mean, that part was great, but he had David Lynch was like, he had a cough or something, I don't know. And they asked for cough drops or something. And so then everyone in the theater who had a cough drop in his or her possession, like, brought them up to the stage to him. So he had this big pile of cough drops. It was a funny moment. But at the end of the night, you could walk down to the stage and people were milling around, and he was down on his hands and knees on the floor, arranging all of these cough drops in a like weird pattern and then taking pictures of them with his phone. I mean, that's what he was doing. So I think, Colin, you know, you're hitting on something that's very real. It's all art to him. That's what I mean. That is the art life, right? He sees everything through that really freaky lens, you know, making art out of cough drops. I don't know. I found it very intriguing.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I really like that.
That's a good one, right? I have a picture. You know, I was there with my husband, so he was trying to get a picture of me with Lynch on the floor. If I can find it, I'll send it to you guys.
That's awesome. And
My only comment on Lynch not phoning anything in, I 99.9% agree. But if you've ever seen his Barilla pasta ad with Gerard Depardieu feeding pasta to some random woman on a motorcycle, I think he might have phoned that one in. But he had to get to Rome to like be at Fellini's deathbed, so I can't.
Yeah, there you go. The photographer is Henry Diltz. That's the photographer. If you look at his work, I mean, he's shot the most iconic album covers of 60s and 70s, I would say. But anyway, it was a fun night.
I love the furniture that he makes too, that shows up in the setting. And I've been looking for like some sort of material or analysis or like, I don't know, just article or on the use of on the furniture in the return. And has anybody ever seen that?
No, and I also want to do one on the cars. That's what I would like to see, an analysis of all the cars in the return.
So two things.
There's like a car IMDb apparently of like all cars in movies.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sure they have some coverage of Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
There is a website out there that I actually used as a reference frequently that lists every single car in the return.
Oh,
and
okay. I never looked it up, but I'm going to.
Here, and what the car was that Big Ed drives, and what car Cooper's driving in the part 18 in both times, and what car is in the intersection that Bobby comes out.
Yeah, there's definitely cars are important for sure.
There is there is a book, I've got it right here, called The Architecture of David Lynch.
Oh, I've seen that.
I need to read that one. I've had it recommended.
Yeah, I have it on my list.
I think it gets into a little bit about the furniture. I think I haven't read the whole thing, but the interesting thing about the architecture of David Lynch, and David, this gets back to the whole idea of curtains, which was one of the questions that Anthony had up there.
Right.
About Lynch is fascinated with the proscenium. He's fascinated with stages. You can go all the way back to Eraserhead, there's a stage, and Elephant Man, there's a stage, and Blue Velvet, there's a stage, and there's stages and curtains, and the idea of these spaces where performances are being. The Roadhouse is a great example, where performances are being conducted, and there's something about that fascinates Lynch. It's sort of like it's almost like they're red rooms in a way. They're stages where things are produced and displayed for us to observe. And I think curtains is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, run silent.
That's fascinating. I think the Straight Story, I just ran through it in my head. The Straight Story might be the only, maybe Dune, the only ones that don't have like
stages,
stage with curtains.
Boy, the Straight Story, I have to go through and think about that one. Yeah, I don't think they're
watching the lightning show. That's about it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there's a view through the window of Alvin collapsing or something, but that's not curtains. Yeah.
No theater.
Yeah. What year is it? I guess I'll ask.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask a trivia question in relation to this. I thought about it. I think I have the answer. I might be missing something. Which 3 decades are never featured on screen in Twin Peaks from the 40s to the 2010s?
That's a good question.
There's only 3 that I can think of.
Ooh, that's a great
and
question.
One of them is very surprising when you think about it.
Sorry, you go on.
2000s.
The 2000s is never featured as far as I can think of, but maybe I'm missing something.
Surprisingly, I don't think the 90s.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think the 90s is ever on screen in Twin Peaks.
And then the 70s, maybe.
Yeah,
they refer to events.
That's the other one, yeah. Because the 60s is in the little Wyndham Earle video. And then you got
Right.
obviously the 50s and the 40s and the return, and then you have the 2010s and the 80s. So
That's
all right,
that's really interesting to
that's
think
my
about.
trivial pursuit question.
That's a good one relating to date. What year is it?
Cool.
I mean, it's
Let's
funny
do,
about it. I ask myself that question all the time.
let's do a little. We'll do a little rapid fire. So give like a 5-second answer, and then if anybody wants to riff on it, and so let's start with Alison. What year?
Oh,
When he says, "What year is this?" What year is this?
I genuinely don't know. You mean like my question is, what is the year that they're in? 89. I don't know. I'm guessing.
Alternate 89, like alternate 85 and back to the future.
Yeah, exactly. I genuinely don't know.
Josh?
The mind that asked that question has been released from time. There's no root. So that's the answer.
Ooh.
John?
I second that.
John?
There is no year. It's the end of time. It's the the end of the dark age.
The Kali Yuga.
Oh, it's the Kali Yuga.
Colin?
I can expand much further if you want to, but I think
For now, just 5 seconds. I'm sorry?
2014, but we can expand on it later on if we can.
All right. I want to hear more on that, but my answer would be it is the year that Unrecorded Night comes out.
Is there anybody who would like to expand on their own or somebody else's answer? Colin, I guess you want to start?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess actually me and Joel, we talked about it when we did the Sarah Palmer episode, where I remember I mentioned that the first time I watched Part 18, when Richard and Carrie are walking up the steps, I remember thinking to myself that if Grace Zabriskie opens that door, that would be more shocking than anything else to me. Like, it never crossed my mind that Grace Zabriskie would open the door. I thought that it was like, there has to be something like, whether it's a red herring or something else. But yeah, no, I think that in the case of like, the reason why I say 2014 is that I think of it as that it is indeed, at least relatively speaking, 25 years past. But I think of like the way that the Tremont/Chalfonts factor into Twin Peaks, the Twin Peaks mythos. And I think of more so their role than the year. Because like I'm almost embarrassed to say, but I feel like when Richard asked what year is this, it never crossed my mind that that would ever be a thing that I would think of in that circumstance, because there's just something about like the way the Tremonts and Chalfonts, where we see actually the quote unquote two Chalfonts in Fire Walk with Me, and the role that the Tremonts and Chalfonts play in for Donna in season 2. So I think of just more so like they invade certain spaces, and there's just something about how they it's for me, it's less of the year and more of the space that they're in and why they're in it to begin with.
What about you, Anthony? What year is it?
Oh, I just asked the questions around. But if I said it's 2017, 2018, would that do anything for you?
It does, because I think the return takes place in 2016. So it would mean it was the future.
I guess actually this is one, because I noticed this with definitely on the Twin Peaks wiki, and also you see it in the Mark Frost books. I think the reason why I said 2014 is that when Laura, because even the very beginning of the return says, "I'll see you again in 25 years," and give or take, because I think it takes place September, October for most of the parts in the return. But yeah, I just never quite understood why it tacked on those extra couple of years, barring the fact that the return came out in 2017.
Yeah, it is odd, isn't it? Because it's like they shot those scenes, at least they shot the location scenes in 2015. It came out in 2017, but like people have done the math and like which day of the week is it when they have like a date on screen and blah, blah, blah. And it's like it only makes sense in 2016, which is kind of fascinating.
Can I please ask Josh to just expand upon his answer a little bit? I want to ask John as well, but he might feel like he's discussed this in the past. But would you mind like repeating your answer and just riffing on that a bit?
You mean for the what year is it?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that idea of being unmoored from time, is a fascinating one. It's certainly something that happens in that scene. Anyone who asks that question, there is no logical answer to it. If you're asking that question, you are in dire straits, or you've been released. And ultimately, in the dream, nobody has a concept of what time it is. So the fact that you ask that question means that you are now aware that you are unmoored. And that awareness, I think, is the ultimate story of the return. It's someone coming back to agency within the dream who forgot that they were dreaming. And indeed, forgetting that they were dreaming was the cause of manipulation. And that's how those dark forces seeped in. So for me, that in question was never an actual question about what year is it. It's more like, oh my gosh, I'm no longer caught in this illusion, in the net of gems, if you will.
When you say illusion, what do you mean?
So for me, the reading of everything that happens in the return is essentially a dream within a dream within a dream that he forgets he's dreaming. So the Candie actually gave me the term that I use for that. It's the version layer. So when we begin in the red room, it's manipulated and corrupted. And when Laura is removed, for me, that is the same moment in part 17 where she's ripped out. So that's the same moment in part 2 and part 17 that's happening simultaneously. And by removing Laura Palmer from what's happening in the red room, it's essentially a support column that's pulled out of that delusion. And that's what allows Cooper to kind of fall into this sub-layer of dream. And in fact, there is a song, I forget which episode it's in, but it's called Sub Dream is the name of the song. It's in the credits. And to me, that's like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I mean, that was hitting me over the head with it. But when Candie tells Anthony Sinclair that we are in the version layer, I kind of seized on that, and I'm like, all right, I'm stealing that, and I'm putting it on. This whole thing that happens from there is the version layer, and it wraps all the way up, and then it's kind of a crawling out of that as he's hacking through these layers of the dream, and he thinks he's saving the girl, but actually he's saving himself. So if that never would have happened, and he did take Laura Palmer home to her house in the world that Mr. C kind of manipulated, Sarah Palmer would have opened that door, and what would have happened? She would have eaten his face, and the golden seed would have been released, and Mr. C would have met her there at those coordinates because that's where they were leading. We saw that in part 17, and he would have seized that golden seed and, in my mind, woken up evil. And that would have been the total corruption of Dale Cooper's soul. So for me, that idea is omnipresent throughout all of the return.
That makes me have like 4 questions at the same time, but I'm trying to keep my cup empty and allow your words to fill my cup so I could, sip on that for a little while. And if anybody else wants to follow, I want to read. I had the first draft of your book, and the new book is out, correct?
So thanks to John Thorne and my work with him, I had to go back and revise the goddamn book.
Okay.
There's a new version of it?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on it right now. It's on Kindle. It's going to be the definitive version.
Excellent.
I don't ever want to touch this stuff again when I'm done with this. I swore I did, and then I started working with during COVID, and it changed it all.
Because
yeah,
I would have to sit, your ideas are really, really interesting, and I assume as profound as they sound on the surface, because, but I would have to sit with that and like read it and like chew on it and like really think.
You'll get a free copy.
Yeah.
So Josh,
that's cool.
Can I ask you that, and we can cut this out if it doesn't fit in or if it's too much to discuss, because this is a big topic. I don't know if I'm, so personally speaking, I'm doing the Twin Peaks conversations. I wanted to have you on at some point. It hadn't happened yet, and now it's sort of my steam has sort of run out a little bit on that project, so I don't know if it's going to happen. But I wanted to have you on at some point. One of the things I wanted to discuss was, I know you've said in your first edition of the book, you had like a theory that Laura was maybe like the dark force of the universe or something. And then I think you said at some point you kind of moved away from that a little. And I was curious about that because I remember when you came out with that theory, I kind of struggled with that a lot. I was like, I don't see that or whatever. And so I was kind of curious if you want to discuss it. And again, this is a bit of a tangent, but what has been your evolution on that particular question?
Quite significantly. So a lot of that came from trying to jam the secret history of Twin Peaks into the return and figure that out, because that's essentially revealed in the final dossier, that essentially the child of Bob and Judy was this, Beelzebub on Earth, which, if Bob is inheriting Leland and Judy is inheriting Sarah Palmer and they had a baby, that would be Laura Palmer. So that was a terrible theory. It was awful. It didn't sit right with me. It didn't feel right emotionally. And eventually it forced me to reevaluate everything that I thought about it. So that first edition of that book was very intellectual. I was really trying to figure it out with these dates and all these things that we've been talking about. I wanted to get that so that it made sense on a timeline on paper. And it never did. It's a terrible way to try and approach the return. It will leave you vacant and without meaning almost. So the second time when I went back through after working with John over that those 2 seasons, I really started to look at this completely differently. And the second edition is much more of a spiritual exercise. I mean, I was joking with Scott Ryan. I'm like, the first edition of that book could have been taught in a sociology class, but the second one could be taught in a church. I mean, I really... This is my spiritual evolution with this art. It's got nothing to do with trying to impose my theories on other people. This is all about my experience and how I have grown as a person by staring into the mirror of this art, how wonderful that we can all look into this thing and see something totally different, but come out the same better people than we were before we went in there. To me, that's the only thing of value about Twin Peaks that really, really matters when we talk about it with others.
That's totally fascinating. I'm curious, like, are you gonna, like, do you have, even though you now kind of reject it, are you gonna have a record of the like the earlier thoughts and kind of like, hey, this is how I reached this point or something by going through this process? Or
I have all those early drafts and editions. I think I was even interviewed, and I think on Twin Peaks Unwrapped, that was where I kind of launched that theory. I mean, it is justified in text. If you want to jam Mark Frost's final dossier and say that they put it together, I think on that element, the really interesting thing about the final dossier is the dissolution of Tammy Preston as a character. So Tammy Preston, being this kind of investigative agency all throughout what I'll call the version layer. And then we get to wrap that up in the final dossier, and she's losing herself. It's like pieces of herself are falling away. She loses the concept of what that is. And for me, I was like, okay, so Mark Frost books operate only within that version layer. It's an alternate version of what happens. It explains everything that's wrong about his books within the context of what was wrong within that version layer of the Dougie Jones layer of what we see from a narrative perspective. To me, I think it's absolutely canon. His books they fit inside that realm, but they don't apply to what we've seen in seasons 1 and 2, pardon me, or even what we see in part 18. Yeah,
that's fascinating. I had one other question before I bring everyone else back in, but I'm trying to think what it was. Basically, so like with, I guess with, oh, okay. No, actually, this is sort of a trivial question now that I think about it. What was that process like with Scott Ryan, who is the biggest Laura Palmer fan in the world, to engage with your idea of Laura initially as the Dark Force? How did he?
You don't talk about Twin Peaks. We're not on the same planet when it comes to Twin Peaks. That's all I'll say about that. But
okay, fair enough. Because I remember you had a Red Room episode where it was sort of like interesting. It was like he was engaging, but okay.
While it was airing, that was one thing. But after it was over, I don't find that a helpful exercise for my own thinking. I love Scott. I value his ideas and his presence, but that's just a subject to discuss. I will say that he was my introduction to Twin Peaks, and so
your brother-in-law, we should say for the listeners who don't know.
Wait, close. He's married to your sister?
No, he's married to his sister.
Right. His wife is your sister. Jen.
His wife. Yes. So Jen's sister is my wife.
Jen's sister is your wife. Okay. Because when we were there last week, my friend Diana and I went to Mary Reber's, and John and Jen were there. Scott and Jen were there, and we had a fantastic day.
Oh, that sounds so fun.
It was like a magical, bizarro, crazy thing to be hanging out at the Palmer house. Yeah.
Actually, the one thing, this is more so about the Mary Reber's home, because I'm one of those people where when I think of the fan, I get a feeling when I see it, but I don't think it's as visceral as like other people. But I remember the first time I went to her home in 2021. We sat down, like we talked in the foyer for a bit, then we sat down, talked in the living room, then the dining room. This is like an hour and a half that we're doing this. I turn the corner, I see the fan the exact angle when we see Sarah Paul in the pot. I literally grab it. She's like, "Holy shit!" Like I just turned back around, and like I think even for her that was like a reaction she did not expect from like most fans. But yeah, I like there's something about when you see it and how untouched that whole hallway is. It's just very unsettling to me.
Yeah. Have you been there, John?
Oh, yeah.
Mary's house? Yeah.
I got to watch part 12 of The Return in the house.
Oh, awesome.
If you remember anything about part 12, there's a scene where there's two weird things happen. I actually wrote about them in the book. But Hawk comes up the stairs and knocks on the door, and I wanted to turn and look.
Right.
But this is
if you did turn and walk toward the door, you don't know what would have happened. But.
Right.
You would have entered another dimension,
another altered universe. Yes.
For the best.
This is a true story. This really happened. We were watching the part 12. Brad Dukes was there, and I don't know, there was a couple other people. I can't remember who all was there, but anyway, there was a noise in the kitchen. There was something fell, and just Mary's daughter moving around, trying to be quiet, not disturb us. But it was so weird. It was
so weird.
And was it during that scene?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask.
Was it during that scene when Hawk goes to visit?
God, it was. I think it was after the scene. So it was. That would have been really weird.
Really weird.
So just super quickly, what is in the show? What is the noise in the kitchen, and or what's up with the looping boxing match? Is the whole scene looping, or is it just the thing on TV that's looping?
Just the thing on
TV. Anybody have like a quick thought about that? Either of those?
It's just time. I think time skipping. Like there's a scene at the beginning of Inland Empire, but there's also a scene at the beginning of The Return where the phonograph is playing, and it's like there's a I interpret it as the needle skipping in the groove, and so time isn't right, and that's a sort of literal manifestation of a needle skipping in the groove. It happens again in her house when she smashes the picture because the glass reforms. It's the same thing. The time is not right in that house. That house is sort of a haunted house where time is all timey-wimey and loopy. and
timey-wimey, yes.
That may be why Cooper says, "What year is this?" I mean, I'm just thinking that now because that's sort of outside of time. Even though I have a different theory about it, whatever.
I guess one of the lens, because actually, John, I really like what you have to say, but I think one of the lenses that I look at, I know I'm just going to state the super obvious, but I'm thinking of like people I know who lost their children at when they were like far too young. And I'm just thinking about how literally time just stands still for them. Because you look at like in part 17, before she goes to destroy the photo, you look at how washed out that homecoming photo is. And it's one of those like moments where it's like, wow, 25 years really was like a while. And like, it's like she's been stuck in this time, like it's pretty much since Laura's death. Like, I don't get too personal, but I had a cousin who died when she was like right before she was out of high school. And my uncle, her dad, literally he had a calendar that would just like be in his home office and just stayed on the day she died. So that's the lens that I look at in terms of Sarah Palmer. about why she's like so stagnant. And like, I think that kind of adds the idea that she's watching, of course, the violence she's seen on TV is like a whole conversation of itself. But there's like, it's one of the factors of why it's like on a loop is that she's just like stuck in this rut that she's like kind of like can't and or won't get out of.
Sure. That's great. Great interpretation.
Yeah, and don't you think it's possible that the noise in the kitchen is the kid from the market who brought her?
Yeah, I definitely wondered that.
Who brought her groceries? I mean, it's like it's a red herring, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something evil,
Sure.
right? It could have been something that simple.
Although I heard interpretations at the time that it was like it was that kid, but she had like trapped him and was like,
oh,
I just remember that in the previous episode when he says, I should deliver her groceries. And he just has this look on his face that says, good Lord, I hope I don't have to be the one. Like, he just wanted to say something nice. He didn't want to actually do it.
yeah.
There's a lesson there. Yeah. He's like, what did I just say? I love those actors, the younger kid actors.
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, John. You probably don't want to talk about it now because you have, but time is not a thing at the end of the show. Is
Yeah.
that, and also to attach to that question, is there anything that you've used to think or believe or interpret that you don't like since the book came out? Like, have you revised anything?
I have some new theories that just like are totally different in a different way, but that's what Twin Peaks is. I mean, we can place the theory on it and it can be very satisfying. We can find another theory too that also is satisfying. And one of the things that's interesting, it's a quick tangent, and I won't go into it, is the idea when Charlie says, do you want me to end your story too? And looking at Inland Empire, the idea of, does someone else have control over your story? And can they write your story? Can they, direct you? And do you give yourself up perhaps to someone else like Leland did to Bob or whatever? That I haven't thought that through. It's just an interesting idea, the idea of storytelling and who is the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that, but I'm thinking about it.
Oh, I like it.
Getting back to the year thing, I mean, it's interesting that Cooper would ask that question. It's kind of a silly question. My theory in my book is that they're at the end of time and Cooper doesn't know how to express when he is. He's trying to find the right words. But also, it still speaks to the character of Cooper a little bit stuck because, what is a year? I mean, what is a year? We would all define a year as like, well, okay, it's, defined by the Earth revolving around the sun and coming back to the same place in that revolution. But that's artificial. In a cosmological sense. If we didn't live on the planet we live in and, we measure time that way, a year is it means nothing. And so when Cooper says, what year is it? He's trying to apply some sort of artificial construct over an impossibility. I think he's at a loss for defining what has happened to him, and he struggles. And it's, in many ways, it's a silly question. What year is it? But
that's the thing. He's trying to make logic out of it, right? I mean,
yes,
yeah. I mean, I love what you just said. So, I mean, I thought of throughout this conversation, I've been asking myself, like, why was that the question? But obviously, he was trying to figure something out that was logical, but it's not logical. None of it's logical.
Right, and year doesn't mean anything to. If there are cosmological beings, or if there are Red Room, Black Lodge beings, do they measure time like we do?
Right.
What is a year to them?
Yeah, and also too, and because I guess when he and Laura are out and they're walking through the forest, I mean, she's who she was when she was 17 or whatever, 16, right? I mean, her character is supposed to be the age she was when she was murdered.
Right.
So, but Cooper they didn't make him his younger self. Right. I mean, it's very confusifying.
Right.
Actually, and I know that this will actually kind of add more credence to everyone who said that there's not quite a year applied to Part 18. But when I think of like once they, because Cooper, he says to Diane that, you know, once we cross, we might not be able to go back. And one of the things that stood out to me is that they show that Odessa says a population of close to 100,000 people, but the whole time in Odessa, it just feels like it's just almost completely dead. Like there's no activity. It feels like it's a much smaller town than Twin Peaks was in 1989. Like, you know, when Richard goes to eat at Judy's, there's all these tables that are just kind of put up, and just like it feels like no one's really been coming through for some time. I guess, you know, because since we're on the topic, more or less, was that ever something that crossed anyone's minds in terms of why Odessa felt so dead, and why Part 18, you know, in general felt that way? Because it is a very small cast that is in like this whole hour.
Yeah. I think there's 8 people in it, in the whole cast, that episode. I mean, if you group the cowboys together, it's like one, whatever.
Right.
I did have the thought at times that maybe Part 18 takes place in 2020 because everything is like shut down. And you know, like the diners lights are off and everything like that. It's like if Alice Tremont had opened the door with a mask on, we would have been all set.
Yeah, well, you know, Joel, I mean, there are some weird coincidences. You know, there's the typewriter in The Secret History as a Corona. And right. Also too, you know, Roswell was actually the first sighting was actually in Corona. It wasn't specifically right there. It was in the town. I can't remember how the story goes, but I mean, Corona is a word that very eerily gets mentioned before COVID actually even became a thing. Mark Frost,
that is interesting.
It's telepathic. Yeah.
I would like to ask, as opposed to the meaning of what year is this, or the answer to what year is this, what is the function of that line? Because well, I have a thought that is not accurate, I'm sure, but it's interesting to me, and that is that like Diane, we see multiple times the Diane Tulpa unable to counter the programming even if she wants to. So if there's some sort of like Tulpa-esque programming, she's unable to hold it off long enough. In fact, she even goes and she tries to shoot people, and you could see her struggling, or seeming to struggle against it. So it seems like that's something that can't be done, that can't be accomplished. And I have this like little fun idea that Carrie is sort of in the same situation, but she's the only one who's able to sort of overcome or counter the programming. And it happens at that moment when he says like, what year is this? And you just like, it's not like a glitchy thing with her, but something is happening and she's able to actually like break through from like sort of programmed type thing to something authentic or whatnot. But I'm sure that's not the deal. But back to my question is, like, what's the function of that line, or what role does that line serve, or what does it do, in your opinions?
I think that it is at least a good segue to when Sarah screams Laura. It like certainly takes me back to 1989 with the pilot. So I think that it at the very least makes a good transition to hearing her say Laura and then Carrie Page screaming. Again, like we're talking about Part 18 and trying to like really fully divulge. I'm still not the best at, but that's at least like my I guess cursory glance take on it.
So it's sort of like moves the plot along. Is that what you said?
At the very least, yes. In terms of, because I feel like if like theoretically if that wasn't there and then we heard Sarah scream Laura, it would probably be less impactful. Because for me, like when I think of like the ending of Part 18, definitely everything with Carrie's scream is like the part that just like resonates with me, like, you know, like through and through. But yeah, again, this is why for me it's like when I hear the like what year is this, just like, you know, in terms of like why Richard / Cooper would say it, I've never felt like there's ever something I felt like, yes, this is why he would say it. I've never felt like 100% comfortable to like why I think he would feel that way.
But it is kind of interesting that the answer to the question is Sarah. He asks the question and then you hear her voice, right? I mean, just as a on its face, you know, it's an ignition of some kind.
Yeah, ignition seems like a really good word. Trigger. I don't know.
I see it just as evidence of Cooper's failure. It could have been any question. What color is it? You know,
Right.
I mean, some questions probably more, significant than others. But he's just lost. He thought he knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He felt so confident. I need to take you home. He never explains to her why.
Right.
I need to take you home. Do it. And do you recognize anything? And we're going to go up. And he goes up the stairs and he's looking suddenly for Sarah Palmer and she's not there. And he's starting to get confused. And then he loses it. He does not understand anymore what he was supposed to do. And so he expresses that by saying, what year is it? Who am I would have been a real blatant, obvious question, or why am I here? Lynch finds a more clever way maybe of expressing Cooper's complete confusion with the question, what year is it?
Yes. And it will forever, for the rest of our lives and generations to come, be having us ask why. Why?
Right. Yeah.
Do you, John, see that like how I do, that Laura does react to Cooper saying that in the way that he says it? She does sort of like look like sideways, hesitate, and then have this whole sort of progression.
About it in the book was that she's been following him. She's sort of been trusting him, says, "You're my ticket out of Dodge." She doesn't say exactly that way, but she realizes when he collapses, essentially, that there's no one left but her. And so it's only a few seconds really for this characterization to come to fruition. But I think it's then obviously, of course, there's Sarah yelling the name, which is more of a trigger than anything else, perhaps. But I think for me, again, as Josh would say, this is how I interpret it, how it works for me.
Yeah.
That's when Laura really emerges out of Carrie. Been slowly emerging on the car ride when she's asking reminiscing about, I tried to keep a clean house.
I love that scene so much.
And Laura's starting to emerge, but she comes out then. And I would, again, very specific interpretation that's where she fulfills her reason for being, and that is to scream. But I guess I would agree with you that the question is evidence to Laura that she can no longer rely on Cooper. He is gone. So that's how I would look at it.
I think another one that's worth mentioning, just because we're talking about the relation to Carrie screaming to when she hears Sarah's screaming Laura, is that when Richard goes to Carrie's house in Odessa, he asks, like, "Are you Laura Palmer?" There's no response. "Is your father Leland Palmer?" Still no response. But when she says Sarah Palmer, there's this sudden like almost like micro expression, and just like the way that she like shudders, like that she knows that there's something wrong.
Right, exactly.
That's not a question. He actually tells her. He says, "Your mother is."
Right. Yes.
She's okay. So he's programming her.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I have a bit of
That's
a different.
A very good point.
Interesting.
That final scene, when he finally says, "What year is this?" and she, blows up, and we hear Sarah Palmer calling out to her dead daughter from the Twin Peaks pilot. That's time being made right again. That's his understanding of reality being made right again. Like the idea that he could have changed time was completely absurd on its face. So that's time resetting itself. Or else why would we hear that particular call out of Sarah Palmer calling out for her dead daughter? We all know that that's what happened in Twin Peaks the pilot. And so when that, which is the actual last spoken line of dialogue in The Return, that question, what year is it? Who is he asking that to? In my mind, he's offering that back up to the viewer. The only meta-narrative, force that's orchestrating meaning out of all of this stuff, it's you and I. We're the ones that he's asking that question, and damn if we have a good answer for it. The only thing we have to say is like, none of that happened, and now we're in this Sopranos fade to black where there is no meaning.
It's funny
And mic drop.
yeah. When you put it that way too, it's funny that like both season 2, or I guess I should just in general, the original series and season 3 end with these unanswered questions. And I guess if we ever get an Unrecorded Night Wisteria follow-up, I almost have to think it won't address the question of what year is this, because season 3 doesn't really address the question of how's Annie. So
Do any of you have nagging questions? That
I have one. I have a nagging question. I watched, when I was there last week, I watched episode 14, which I've seen many times. So it's the scene where Ed comes to the diner and tells Norma that he's free. And when I watched it this time, and again, this is just conjecture, but I wondered, as soon as I saw it, did Norma know what she was going to say? Or did she change her plans on the spot when Ed said to her, I'm free and I can be with you now? Did she just decide to tell the other guy, you know what, I'm out? Do you think that's possible, or did she know?
I definitely have thought about that, and I think there's a really good argument that could be made that when he said that to her, she shifted her position.
Plans.
She was like, "This is what's going to happen now." And
I never thought of that before. I don't know. I saw it differently this time.
yeah, no,
awesome.
that thought definitely occurred to me too. It's like, why, like, because she has this kind of stunned reaction on her face,
Right.
and it's like, I got to talk to this guy now, and it's like, yeah, I love how he doesn't answer that.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, good.
and
I'm glad.
I think she says like, I could have many, but I only want one. Talking about the diner, and then
Right.
then he's like, I thought you had no family, and she's like, no,
Right.
I want to be with my family. So that doesn't answer your question, but that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I don't know why that hit me that way.
I like the other guy too. I like the restaurateur guy. I don't know.
I didn't like him.
Yeah, me either. Me either. Go back to 80s television.
Right, he was Northern Exposure, right?
Right. He was also on 8 is Enough, right? Wasn't
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know
about this guy though, because I do observe that
Michael Lookinland or something.
I don't understand it. Almost nobody likes him, and all he's doing is, in my opinion, all he's doing is doing his job.
Yeah,
pretty well.
He's being the man. I mean, literally, and
like
and the corporate man. You know, he's destroying the small business.
I think that's the Frost, a distinct Frost
for sure.
And that Frost commenting on the idea.
100%. Yeah.
Definitely.
Guys out, and you take this, you're going to dilute it, and you're going to make it less than what it is, and it's pure as Norma's, the double R, by expanding. And then of course they comment on that. She sources all her own stuff.
Right.
They're getting inferior ingredients for the pies or whatever. So that's Frost, and that ties right into Dr. Amp's.
Dr. Amp, totally.
So I think Frost very pleased to get that little plot.
I think they could
I
have
have less of a problem with that stuff, but yeah.
Well, I think they could have left him like a little more ambiguous, but the fact that they add that line where he's like, "Who is that guy?" when Ed talks to him, it's like, okay, they want you to dislike him.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
Yeah, exactly.
They want you to be annoyed with him, totally.
And I know this is like a little bit of an earlier scene with Walter and Norma, but it's the scene when he's talking about like the cherries, about like how like the original double R is the only one that's not turned a profit. And when she's talking about like how it's like all organic, it's all local, it was actually one of the scenes that reaffirmed the idea that food is like a very central part of the return, because there's something about like the environment that Norma facilitates the double R. And then meanwhile, you have Chantal and Hutch, where they eat nothing but trash. And then you have Chad, who's not eating just one but two TV dinners when Frank Truman has to boot him out. I was like, there's definitely something about food. I personally, I think it's more of a Frost thing, but also I think there's at least a tangential sickness, like I was mentioned earlier, that about what Lynch gravitates to. But so yeah, I don't know. Food just something that like it comes up a lot more every time I watch The Return now.
Yeah.
Food has a big political bend to it. And I would agree that frost, I mean, my theory about the corn is totally frost. Corn subsidies, and I don't know. I did a little bit of a nerdy deep dive on that one, but
it's actually funny because when I went to go visit Emily Marinelli a month or so ago, and we were talking about like when I did my icon for Cream Corn in the Universe, we were talking about, I was like, yeah, it's very telling that with prices going up for food these days, I can still get a can like that for like 50 cents and just dump it in, and then like that's what it is with all corn products, is that it's like one of the few things that happens, just like maintain its price because it's so cheap, and just like, so there's so much you can do that's just like really not good in general.
Well, and corn syrup in general, it's made America super duper fat and unhealthy. I mean, it's Carmen Bozia. Yeah, and also too, I'm sure I'm not original on this thinking, but about the Cheetos, that Chantel eats all the Cheetos, and it's cornmeal. It's quick Carmen Bozia.
If it wasn't 11 or whatever,
that's like the crack form of Garmin Bozia.
Right.
Yeah. If it wasn't so dark out, I would be seeing a field of corn right out the window. So the street I live on is cornfield. So it's an interesting topic around here. And I always did wonder like why that food versus a different food. But Colin, did you just say you made your own icon?
Oh no, all that was DIY. It's from like my very early days when I did Instagram, but I did get a picture of just like all the materials I had before I made it. It was a weird. It was actually this.
Did you make the red room floor? Or?
I painted that. Then I bought these like little curtains. It was all the stuff at Hobby Lobby. It was actually like, this is usually my Twin Peaks shelf. Like I said, I'm going to be painting soon, so I just moved stuff. But I had it dangled off the curtains. I had actually my Twin Peaks books holding it up. And I must have, I think my window was open. So someone must have thought my Friday night was really weird, because it was me with my iPhone just like trying to like get the right angle for like with this like cream corn, like red drapes. I was like, I remember at some point I took like 50 photos. I'm like, my neighbors must think I'm absolutely insane.
So unlike the other company here, you're a bit eccentric, I would say. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was wondering, like, would it be different if it wasn't an arm? Mike's arm, the arm. Would it be different if it wasn't creamed corn? If it was something else?
Well,
these things are just arbitrary. The
creamed corn, I know. David Lynch was like in the commissary at whatever on the sound stage, and they were serving creamed corn that day when he was shooting episode 9, and he just like stared at it, and then sure enough, it was in the scene with his son on set dressed as him, and like it wasn't in the script or anything. So like that's that. Yeah, I think everything. I kind of feel this way with Lynch in general, and I think Mulholland Drive bears this out, because he shot all this stuff for the TV pilot that had no resolution, and then he shot the last half hour where it like is given its significance, but like he just kind of is attached to like an image or an idea, and he goes with it, and later on he figures out what it means, and he's like brilliant at figuring out what it means if he wants to. Again, with Inland Empire, I think he kind of, I almost feel like Inland Empire was like a response to how clearly everyone saw Mulholland Drive, thanks in part to his like clues or whatever, and he was like, okay, never again. But
it's funny because I was actually talking about like, even like, what was it, at this point 5 months ago, when I helped Rebecca Del Rio with a Mulholland Drive event, I actually had this like reverse feeling of how I felt about Mulholland Drive, because for the longest time, like, I mean, for years, I felt like what was happening in the beginning was the reality, and then the Silencio was effectively this universe version, if you will, of Between Two Worlds, and then they step into a dream. And I think because I realized I had to reevaluate it, I was like, oh wait,
that's like, fascinating.
No, there's I think that for me, if I had to pick one scene, it's really just when Diane, when she goes to the party, and it just, everything just feels so confined. It's very anxiety inducing. I think there's something about seeing the cowboy out of the corner of her eye, where there's all these things where, to me, that feels so much more dreamlike than everything leading up to the Silencio scene. Or even just like the way where the camera zooms into the doorway to Silencio, where I was like, oh, I feel like I'm really stepping into a dream now. So like I said, that's a topic for another time. But yeah, it's like after years of feeling very firm about it, I have to be like, oh well, Naomi Watts is too golly gee in this like first like 2/3. I need to really come to terms with that. Or then there's a lot of other small things where I'm like, okay, I got to come to terms with that.
Somebody, I don't know if it was Anthony, did say this was going to be a Mulholland Drive podcast, so
Oh,
appropriate. But, two things. One is that's fascinating to me because I had it presented to me like before I saw Mulholland Drive, which was only the second Lynch film I ever saw. It was like kind of given to me of like, oh, well, the thing about Mulholland Drive is that the last part is a dream. So like I had that going in, like I never really got to see it any other way. So it is interesting to hear people when they have a different perspective on it, because like I've only ever had that framework for it. And then like also I noticed you have a Wisteria shirt. I love that.
It's the I guess I'll just say it's the Wisteria Lodge shirt.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
The band. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, that's the base because I guess no, I just bought the shirt. I don't think there's really much of a story behind that.
No, that's funny. It just kind of poked into frame and I was like, oh, whoa.
Hopefully
I'm gonna,
sometime
John, real
have
quick, I'm sorry, John. Let me just interrupt you a second.
Yeah.
Because I just got a little group chat text, and I think Josh has to go in a second. So I just wanted to,
I need to jet too.
I imagine most people are feeling this way.
It's late on your side for sure.
Yeah.
I got to get up and hustle soft.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt everybody. Really, really, really appreciate you coming.
Thanks for the invite.
And nice to see you face to face.
You're all awesome. This is time well spent.
Yeah, this was fun.
This was great.
And it was really good to see everyone again because actually, Joel, sadly, I haven't actually seen you in person yet. But yeah, it's hard to believe that everyone here I've been able to see this year in some capacity. So
awesome.
Yeah, so it's really good to see everyone like familiar faces again.
And I should all stay next year if we can. That would be wonderful.
Definitely.
I made 3 cups of coffee during this, so if anybody wants,
you won't be going anytime.
Yeah, I'm good for I'm good for as long. But Josh, I know you had to go. Is there? I don't know. Did you want to have any parting words, or is that dumb?
So I guess my hanging question, you asked if there are any nagging questions, and it's a throwaway line. It's a throwaway scene in part 1 when we first meet Beverly and see Ben Horne for the first time. We learn about this lady who has a skunk in her room, and she asks Ben Horne a question: how did this cunt get a room? And he said he does a double take. John says no. I swear she says this, and then she says again, "The skunk get in her room."
Oh,
so,
that's so funny.
I never picked up on that.
There's a funny double take in there, and I'm convinced that that's what she says.
That's the portal. That's so funny. I can't wait to watch that.
It's a great line. I put it in headphones. I listened to it several times, and I'm absolutely convinced that's what she says the first time.
Wow. That's awesome.
So what was that? What was it? Why?
Why?
You're going to make him repeat it?
That word.
I don't. I've heard better words before, but why was that there? Is that your hanging question?
That's my hanging question. Did she really say it, or is that just? I'm
gonna have to go back and listen.
Yeah, we'll have to have a vote on that for sure. Very important.
That as well, because the double take is actually super funny. If that's because Ben Horne goes, "What? I'm sorry, what?"
I have a friend of mine has shared with me like really high quality audio only versions.
I'll put him on it. And, put him on the mission.
So sometimes I just listen to the episodes instead of watching it, and
that's kind of fun. Yeah,
it really is amazing.
Any Lynch film, honestly.
I do have that scene, so I'm gonna
sound and music would be like. I in fact, you give me an idea. I think I'm gonna burn the soundtracks and listen to them sometime when I'm sick of podcasts.
There you go. Awesome.
Great. All right, friends, I'm going to jet. I appreciate you all. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, Josh, it was great to talk to you.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye, Josh.
Thanks, man.
And
All right.
actually, I put some of the comments as well. Is that I have a half hour to get stuff like for shaving Listerine. So I'm gonna just I
Plus
have
you'll
like
have your-
I have like a quasi filter on Zoom, but I look like it's like this disgusting. Not even 5 o'clock show, just like this 6 o'clock, like just this disgusting thing going on. I was like, I gotta get this done before I go to work tomorrow. So no, I just want to say, I mean, I guess I said it already, but it was really great seeing everyone again. Yeah,
You too, Colin.
hoping to see you all in some way or another next year. Definitely for
In
Twin Peaks
February.
Day for everyone who's going. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Definitely.
But yeah, no, I should probably get there before it closes. But I just want to say, I hope you all have a great night. And it was really great catching up with all this.
Yeah, take care.
Same.
All right, take care, everyone.
Bye,
Goodbye.
All
Colin.
right.
Thank you, man.
All right. I feel like we should do, so long, farewell. Up fingers, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to bid you adieu as well. I'm going to have some dinner. I have officially finished work, but this was such a treat. Thank you, Anthony, for including me. I am honored.
Yeah, well, the pleasure. I know I could speak on all of our behalf. The pleasure was ours.
It was really a joy. I feel like, I mean, it's endless, and I would love to do it again. So I hope everybody is on board to do it. I'm just really grateful, and yeah, hopefully you can make it to Twin Peaks Day next year.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do this again sometime.
Yeah.
I had to buy I had to re-up my Zoom subscription, so now I need to justify that.
Yes, exactly. You can do it. Well, we're here for it for sure. So, John and Joel, a pleasure, such a joy.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you so
fun.
much. Yeah, really. All right, you guys have a good rest of your evening.
You too.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks
Bye.
again.
All right, I think I might be the next one out, but
Do you want to sneak in a Mulholland Drive comment first?
Oh, God, you started talking about Mulholland Drive. I
2 hours later.
Joel and I did
We
an
did. It hasn't come out yet. It's still it's still in the vault.
when you talked to me, Joel, I was right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Getting into it. I have been working on that since we talked. I don't think a day has
Is it a
gone.
book or
Brief trip I took to Alaska. I have been immersed in Mulholland
Oh,
Drive.
that's fascinating. Okay.
And I mean, today I spent probably hours writing about it.
Nice.
I got myself from talking about it, but it's just, I mean, the stuff here. So here's the thing. I'm gonna say this, and we may have talked about this, Joel, but think about this as sort of a mental exercise. What if? I wish I brought this up earlier and where everyone could contribute, but what if Twin Peaks had been passed by ABC? What if ABC said, we don't want to make Twin Peaks and we're not going to air the pilot? And then someone came along to Lynch and said, we wanted you to turn it into a feature film, the pilot, which is exactly what Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
What would that have been? In some ways, I think it would have been a 30-minute version of The Return. so that it, it's all recontextualized, which is what Mulholland Drive was. It was recontextualized as a dream. I think something similar would have happened. That it would have been, there would have been some other reality, and Cooper would have been the one who had dreamt this visit to this little town, and all the little things that happened in there would have reflected something. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I feel like the like ideal, almost like platonic version of that would be, and I've said this before, but it's like, I think I said this in our conversation maybe, but it would have almost been the Twin Peaks pilot attached to like the Laura part of Fire Walk with Me, maybe like boiled down a little bit, but like that would have been the key to unlock the first part, in the same way that the last part of Mulholland Drive unlocks the first part. Like that, and it almost feels like, in a way, he was able to conceptualize Mulholland Drive because it lived through that 3-year experience of like pilot TV series Fire Walk with Me, and like coming back and like unrooting, like pulling up like what had been at the root of it all along, but hadn't been visualized yet,
Yeah, I'm writing about that now. And it's fascinating because Lynch had filmed a closed ending for Mulholland Drive.
Which he did, and we mentioned this in our conversation. The Silencios Club is like that was the closed ending for Mulholland Drive. Like he shot it in '99, right? Like before he got the funding from the French.
Got it during the making of the pilot, and from a very reliable source about a scene that was never included in any version, where the detectives go to the morgue and Rita is dead.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
No, and so I think
because there's a morgue scene that's in the deleted scenes, right, on the Criterion disc or something.
No, scene about the detectives discussing the.
It's not a morgue. Okay.
No, but anyway, my guess is that the original closed Mulholland Drive was supposed to be Rita's fantasy, that Rita's died and she had like a incident at Owl Creek Bridge kind of, I'm losing battery, so I got to go. But anyway, it's fascinating. It's just so fascinating because he didn't use it. He could have said, "All right, it's done. It's already done. I've got a film."
Yeah.
But and it's the same reason he went back, I think, to make Fire Walk with Me, is because there wasn't enough of a driving mind. There wasn't enough of an inhabiting mind underneath the story of Mulholland. And he wanted to create a mind that would have envisioned those 2 hours. And so he comes up with this Diane Cohen character. And in some ways, he did that with Fire Walk with Me. He wanted to make Laura more of a subject, less of an object. He wanted to make her more real than she was as this body in Twin Peaks. Anyway, there. I knew I was going to do this. I'm sorry. There it is.
So wait, is your foreground, is that like a log, like the log lady's log that she's holding? The wooden.
John has been asked this before.
Okay.
In front of your shirt, is that a log there?
Oh, this?
Yes.
Oh, it's a table. Oh, it's an actual thing. Okay, I thought it was like a fake foreground. That's funny. Yeah.
Anyway, someday, hopefully in the near
Something
future.
else I wanted to ask about. No, I'm just kidding. I'll enjoy it. So wait, the two of you recorded something?
Yeah, but it hasn't been. It's gonna be my last Twin Peaks Conversations episode, and I had a whole thing about I was gonna finish all my projects by late October. It's not gonna happen remotely for the Twin Peaks stuff. So like I'll maybe wrap up my film and TV commentary because I have a few random stray things that I want to do with that. But like all the Twin Peaks characters, the Lost in Twin Peaks that I'm like re-editing for my Patreon, and the Journey to Twin Peaks, which haven't even started the last part of those videos yet. That's all going to have to be in the future. There's no way. I mean, it's now 2 months left of, so.
Yeah, we've talked about your
that's going to have to be the future. So it is what it is. But yeah, that conversation, I was thinking there's two conversations I wanted to have. I mean, there's a bunch I mentioned tonight with Josh. It was like, I kind of wanted to have him as a guest at some point. It's like, excuse me, most of that's probably not going to happen. But the two that I would like to do, I'd like to talk to Jeremiah, the Take the Ring guy, because I haven't watched any other video essays on Twin Peaks. I don't want to like kind of tamper with my own kind of approach to Twin Peaks video essays. So I've been waiting to watch them till after I finish my own. Like I said, I haven't even started the last part of them. So I think he would be somebody I'd like to talk to. And then with John, I want to have like a kind of a composite podcast where we recorded something back in, I think, May. I'm talking about Twin Peaks. We ended up talking about Mulholland Drive a lot. And I said, I'm going to combine this with a conversation we'll have after I finish these videos, which again is, in my idealized view, is like a few months away, and is God knows how long far away now. But whenever that happens, we'll do a follow-up, I think. And those will be like the last two episodes as I wrap up my Twin Peaks work someday.
Cool.
Good
Distant future.
Well, my battery's almost out, so I'm gonna have it very soon.
Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
was fun.
Lots of fun, and let's do it again sometime soon.
I'm down.
You know,
Yeah, I'm down.
good deal.
Had a good time. It was an experiment for me, and I had a really good time. And I always love things even more when I'm watching it.
Yeah, it was very freeform. I feel like you had like a lot of, probably only asked like a quarter of your questions from like that list.
Yeah,
that list you popped up at one point, but it was like we kind of went off on these little tangents. So it was fun.
It's usually.
Yeah, that's how it goes. Thanks, man.
All right, gotta go. Joel, Anthony,
All
good
right,
talking
bye-bye.
to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, I guess we'll close it out here. But anything you wanted to say at the end of your own episode?
I was already thinking I might just do a little thank you message to all of you when it's just me and the camera, but I guess I could do that now.
Either way, I can go if you want.
No. I would like to take just a minute to thank everybody because it was I to quote you in the past, I have had my dinner with Andre experience where on the one side you're sort of ecstatic and almost religious about the experiences, and then you fall into a sort of more like the Wallace Shawn character. Where you're like, a little more laid back and content and pleased, and that's how I am with most of my life. But I was heading there with the Twin Peaks element of my life as well, and maybe even more than relaxed, maybe even just sort of like growing distant for various reasons. And I was just really happy to like reach out to a group of people, and especially the particular group that I reached out to. And it was, it was like reinvigorating as far as Twin Peaks emotional stuff, but also just really nice on a personal note, to see everybody. I'm glad we could do this. And I would be down for doing this again with if people were up for it.
Yeah, that's funny. You used almost the exact words I was thinking of, which is like, I was going to say rejuvenating, because it gets, I like for so long, and we've discussed this, I have these like long lists of like, I'm doing this thing and that thing, and then I'm reaching this project and blah, blah, blah. And I want to finish it all before, this birthday or whatever. Like I have these whole like plans and itineraries, and they always take longer than you think. And it gets to be a bit of a slog at times. And I still enjoy doing the work at that moment, but like all the moments in between where I'm like, I gotta squeeze in this tonight. I gotta stay up a little later and get to, less sleep before work because I gotta do this and that. It like gets to be a little wearisome. And it's like talking to other people and getting that kind of spark is always fun and kind of invigorating.
Yeah, it is. And like you were saying, as far as like fluctuating between keeping it loose and keeping it focused, that's almost inevitable, because on the one hand, it's a little bit of like a social gathering and just really nice on the personal note to get together. And then on the other hand, there are like these certain questions that you want to kind of hit, even if they're not absolvable questions. But for me, like, I guess one of the messages that I'll walk away with is that this this takes a long time. Like if I wanted to go through all the questions that I had, or even just to talk about all the topics that I'd like to talk to you guys about, that I can't be done in a couple hours. I thought it could.
Well, there's a couple approaches. There's like, because we did the one, and I think it's fun, but you'd almost have to like delineate, like we're gonna do this for a half hour or an hour or whatever. It's like the rapid fire, like you have a minute to answer or something. Yeah. But everybody has to be on board with that. It's different, I guess, when it's two people versus like 7 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But like that's another. Yeah, that's a fun approach too. But I excuse me. Yeah.
So I'll give you the close if you want. Not the close off my back, but I would if you needed them, but the closing.
Close for me, I guess, just anybody who's listening, you can check out my work, lostinthemovies.com. I have a patreon.com/lostinthemovies. Lately, I've just been previewing tons of stuff. A lot of it I haven't put out yet. A lot of movie coverage, talking about Sight and Sound poll from 2022 where they ranked the best movies of all time, and I've kind of been covering the ones that I hadn't talked about before, many of which I hadn't even seen before on my site. So that's been fun. And yeah, just random. I think the next couple months will be me tying up all the loose ends I want to tie up of random non-Twin Peaks, and then using from that point on, from like November onwards, just concluding these Twin Peaks projects, which have been percolating for years. I mean, a decade in Journey Through Twin Peaks case, because I started that in 2014 and paused it, waited for the return, and then it took several years before I got back to that. And now it's been several years since the last few videos. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of work upcoming. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, you never have a shortage of projects.
Oh, God knows.
Well, let's just for old time's sake, let's do the 45-second or less thing. So you're on the clock. And the closing question is, at the very end of Twin Peaks, is Dale Cooper out of the Red Room, still in the Red Room, back in the Red Room, or none of the above?
Either still or back in the Red Room.
You have 30 seconds to riff.
Yeah, I could accept either of those. I don't think he's not in the Red Room. I think he's still in it or back in it, like he's bounced back into it. I just feel, and this is me, I need more. I need my fire walk with me for the return, just like we had a fire walk with me for the original Twin Peaks show. The Wisteria on Recorded Night, and I didn't need it before the return, but now I need it. So give it to me, Lynch or Frost or whoever, or both, or neither, or well, no, not neither. Definitely Lynch. Maybe Frost, maybe he can write a book, or maybe he'll collaborate. Although I feel like it would be like Firewalk with me. It would be more Lynch led, but we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we will see. Maybe it's already done. Who knows?
Yeah, it could have been done years ago.
Right.
He's just teasing us.
Thank you, Joel.
All right. It was fun. Thank you, Anthony.
Me too. I really appreciate it.
When do you plan on putting it up?
We'll see. Probably
got to do a little editing, I guess.
Yeah, usually I try to do things sooner than later, but I don't know.
No rush.
Yeah, I don't
but
have
just
any,
curious. Yeah.
I'm not successful as far as strategizing that stuff.
Sometime in September or October.
Yeah, I mean, look, for the people who want to see it, they'll see it. You know.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
I'll certainly keep in touch, man. And
all right.
Yeah. We'll maybe we'll do it again.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right. Bye bye.
Suppose I should deliver some sort of message now, but I think I did that before, so